to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous
They're still playing
conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story
Are we not going
not
to
just resilience, but
Plain Feet?
militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller, and we are broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Coal miners are still on strike. Socialists raise thousands for their strike fund while Republicans tell them to kiss the boss's ass. Bosses steal billions every year, but Al Sharpton is worried about 10 steaks being stolen from a grocery store. The Alabama House passes an anti-speech bill last week, and we are planning to speak to the bill's author, but he's not in the Zoom yet, so we'll see how that goes. We've got more than that on today's Valley Labor Report, so you'll want to stay tuned. If you want to be part of the program today, we've got a phone number. You can call 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave a voicemail throughout the week, and we got one last week, so we're going to be answering it on today's show. So that's always an option. If you listen to us as a podcast, you can leave us a voicemail. That's always an option. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap our hour here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, then you can find us online. We're everywhere you can find anything, all at the Valley Labor Report. Wherever you get your podcasts, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube, all those places, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. So your support really does help. If you want to become a sustaining member of the program or make a one-time donation, you can go to unionly.io/o/TVLR or patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. We've also got a new hat. We just dropped yesterday a new hat. Adam, can you show the people on the stream what the hat looks like? For everybody that's just listening to us on audio, it's a trucker hat. We love trucker hats. And it's got a patch on the front of it that's like a graph. And unions are the x-axis and good things are the y-axis. So as we have more unions, we have more good things. And you'll be telling everybody that if you buy that hat. You can, there's an option there for if you're local, you can just meet us somewhere and you won't have to pay for shipping, and that'll only be like $29.97 or something like that, less than $30. And we'll just drop it off to you if you're local. If you're not local and you do need it to be shipped, then you can buy the option that has shipping included. So, those are I think it's a really cool hat. The artwork was done by Tabitha Arnold. She is a Philadelphia artist, and we've got more things that are going to be popping up in our store later by her. So really, really excited about that. If you're a member of a union, you should get your local to sponsor the show as well. You can reach out to me for more details on that. So, Adam, have we got State Representative Treadaway in the Zoom? I'm not hearing you. I think you muted your mic.
I'm checking. I do not see the representative in the chat.
Oh, man. He's not in the Zoom?
He's not in the Zoom.
Oh, man. I just confirmed with him like 2 days ago. Like on Thursday evening, and he said he was good to do, and he said he was good to like check in at 9:25 to do an AV check. So I don't know if he, I don't know, maybe he just slept in, or maybe he Googled us. Maybe he Googled us.
I'll keep my eyes peeled. Hopefully
Yeah.
the representative would join us because I really would like to chat with him. I know you've got some great questions to ask, so hopefully he will be joining us shortly. But
Yeah, well, so we've been tracking this legislation for the last couple of weeks. We've been sounding the alarm on it, and it's we think it's very bad. We are not apologetic about thinking that it's bad, but we always the door is open to anybody that wants to come on the show and defend their positions, and we appreciated his willingness to come on.
yeah, absolutely.
I'm not sure what happened, but he's not on right now. So Adam, can you kind of, you are a former history teacher, and you still that's still definitely in your blood. Can you kind of help us contextualize this bill while we wait potentially for the representative to join the line?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Thinking about this bill, and especially after I saw that you had secured the legislator, which I hope, still happens. And, it's interesting to talk to the author of a bill like this, especially a bill that we've been so adamantly opposed to. But really, my biggest question to start with is, if we're being honest, is this bill really for everybody? Is this something that is aimed at all people of Alabama, or just some kind of folks?
Mm-hmm.
Are we supposed to believe that cops and prosecutors and judges across the state of Alabama are going to enforce this bill equally across all types of people? Now, I'm still a fairly young man, not as young as I look maybe, but I have a hard time believing that. I'm sorry. I have a hard time believing that this is for everybody. And, this is one of those pieces of legislation where you have to ask, is this really going to solve more than it causes problems? Are the solutions that are in this bill actually going to be better than the problems that come out of it? And unfortunately, in Alabama's legislature, that's so often the case, especially with these hot topic bills that go through every session, certainly on an election year session like 2022. So, you mentioned I'm a former history educator. I think history is important. Hot take, I know. But I think history is important. I think it helps to put ourselves in context and the issues we're dealing with in context. I think it helps to know the past so that you can understand the present and understand our possible futures. So with all that said, as Alabama looks to advance this anti-riot bill, quote unquote, I'm sort of thinking about riots in Alabama. What are the riots that have taken place in Alabama? And most of what you could call riots in the history of our state were at the hands of racist lynch mobs, the Klan, other white supremacist forces of all stripes, to include those in law enforcement themselves. And, I'm talking about events like the election massacre in Eufaula back during Reconstruction in 1874. Thinking about the Birmingham riot in 1963, and on and on and on. Throughout Alabama history, we've also seen company thugs and other violence with company thugs and their allies and accomplices in law enforcement seeking to violently crush workers for even trying to build a labor movement here in this state. I'm thinking about Gadsden, Alabama, some of the violence that we saw in Gadsden, Alabama, especially back in the early 30s during that massive organizing wave and the massive strike wave that we saw across textile mills and industries all over the country. It was right here in our backyard as well. And the company thugs, their allies in law enforcement and the authorities, they used violence to try to keep out the unions. They used violence to try to prevent integration in the unions. So I've been thinking about that. And of course, those tactics were then later used on the civil rights activists and organizers in Gadsden throughout the years that followed. even Huntsville. Right here, we're broadcasting from Huntsville. You know, if we want to think about Huntsville's riot police, the riot police in Huntsville was actually debuted against striking rubber workers in 1994. The same riot police that we've discussed in June 2020. So, you know, if we bring it forward, we know that the Black Lives Matter protest that took off in 2020 after the police execution of George Floyd became the largest protest movement in our history. And we're talking incredibly diverse crowds across 50 states, all 50 states, small communities to the biggest cities. And we know that, you know, underneath all the rhetoric and some of the hysteric news coverage, particularly on the right of these demonstrations, they were remarkably peaceful and demonstrably peaceful. You can Google it for yourself if you don't believe me. Overwhelmingly peaceful, especially considering the amount of human beings involved and the issues at stake here, literal life and death issues at stake. Now, and, you know, and common sense tells you if you get enough people together, well, there's bound to be at least one jackass in any crowd big enough, right? I mean, that's just inevitable. But these demonstrations, which obviously this bill and others like it in state after state have been in response largely to this uprising, this interracial uprising against criminal injustice and police violence. So in the cases where there was violence with these protests, which again is the like obsessive focus of some folks on the right, in many of those cases, it was far-right instigators or the law enforcement themselves who escalated the situation or who instigated the violence. That's reality. Far-right provocateurs. And if you look at what we know based on the history of this country, the history of every major social movement in this country, we know how the governments respond. So we can safely assume that at least some of these folks out here causing problems at these demonstrations are themselves government agents or criminal informants. Now, that's not me being a wild conspiracy person. That's just me paying attention to the history of every social movement in this country. That's why history is important, to provide this context. So, and we also know, and something that, Jacob, you've done a great job really keeping in the forefront, we know how the state forces use what they already have before this bill is even enacted, and hopefully will not be enacted, but we see how they're already responding to our brothers and sisters down in Brookwood on the picket line. We've seen how this county judge can issue injunctions against the striking miners down there to restrict their First Amendment rights, while the authorities turn a blind eye to the violence and tactics and misbehavior of scabs and people aligned with the bosses, and in some cases bosses themselves. You know, and I appreciate your reporting on that. And something we've also discussed is in this bill, it of course takes a mandatory holding time. Well, in the state of Alabama, you know, that is no joke.
Right.
We are talking about Alabama's jails and prisons are notoriously unsafe. They are so unsafe that our federal government, the same government that presides over the highest incarceration rate on planet Earth, even they say Alabama's a bridge too far. Even they're like, wait, hold on. Y'all's system of jails and prisons is pretty messed up. You're going to have to do something, or we'll have to take it over ourselves. So that's how damn bad these are. It's not just a routine, visit. When you go in, I mean, I think we can't say it enough that a 24 or 48-hour hold in a jail in Alabama can ruin your life, and it might just end your life. That's not a weapon to be used against people lightly. especially when they are trying to exercise their rights under the Constitution and, frankly, their human rights, just by virtue of being on this planet with all of us, along with for this ride with all of us. So, again, and you think about Huntsville. We've talked about this as well. In Huntsville, the June 2020 protest that took place here, to the extent that there was any riot, quote unquote, it was at the hands of the police. It was the police who rioted, not the people. The people were peaceful. And I'm sorry, but you're never going to convince me that because some folks in a crowded, chaotic situation didn't immediately run to their cars when given a curfew that they may or may not have heard, that is somehow, a carte blanche excuse to then start tear gassing people. I'm never going to accept that. And it's wild that folks who fly "Don't Tread on Me" flags and praise small government can defend that.
Yep.
So that experience in Huntsville definitely, colors my perception of this bill. And again, that's not just my opinion about what happened in June 2020 in Huntsville. There's very clear, extensive reporting, and there's evidence from the city's own investigation, their own independent investigation. However toothless it might have been, it very much confirmed what we discussed on this show and what so many other activists in the community have pointed out about what really went down in those events. So now I know Representative Treadway is retired police from Birmingham, and he has brought up Birmingham's experiences with those protests as his rationale for this legislation. But I mean, let's look at it. Even this so-called riot in Birmingham during 2020 protest. Yes, I mean, there were some incidents where it got out of hand, it got ugly. There were a few, knuckleheads, as you can get with any crowd. But there were some folks who got rowdy. There was some property damage. Mm-hmm. That is true. That's true. But now weigh that against the routine gun violence and violent crime that happens every year in Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
That's not connected to any movement. It's just, that's a fact of life. It looks pretty tame when you think of it that way. The fact that, some idiots broke some windows, tried to rob some stuff. Well, okay, there are folks trying to rob stuff every day in this state. It's not necessarily political. And it also looks tame compared to the long, ugly history in Alabama of white supremacist violence and anti-union violence directed against ordinary people, everyday people like us, and the types of folks who are on the receiving end of these bills. So, again, I say all that to try to put it in context, because that's how I'm thinking about it. And having said all that, I can't help but ask, okay, again, is this really for everybody? Because I'd like them just to come right out and say what they really mean. Because I think we can reach our conclusions here, but you're not going to convince me that the cops and prosecutors and judges of this state are going to be using this law against wealthy, powerful folks in the same way they'll use it against working class folks and poor folks. You're not going to convince me it's going to be applied the same way to Black Lives Matter protesters and, socialist protesters and gay and trans protesters, the same way it's going to be used against far-right demonstrators. I mean, in the state of Alabama, there have been multiple people indicted or under investigation for participating in the January 6, 2021 riots in D.C. Now, is that who you're concerned about, Representative? Because I got a feeling it's not. So, and again, our state motto is "We dare defend our rights." Nearly every leader of this state for over 200 years that we have been a state has championed small government. Now, whether they believed it, whether they enacted it, they all said it. Almost every leadership we've ever had for 2 centuries in this state talks about small government. So I don't think it's a lot to ask that we, the people of Alabama, be able to exercise our First Amendment rights to free speech and free assembly without the threat or fear of being locked in a cage by armed agents of the state.
Yep. Yeah, it's not unreasonable at all. And so we're going to go to a break really quick. I just got a message from the representative saying he was having difficulty getting into the Zoom, asked us to send him a new link. So let's go ahead and jump to a break really quick, and we'll see if we can't get Representative Treadaway on to talk about his bill. So make sure you stay tuned. You are listening to the Valley Labor Report. Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
IBEW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBEW is the right choice.
Energy Alabama is a locally operated and membership-based nonprofit organization focused on advancing Alabama's clean energy future through education and advocacy. Many people in charge of infrastructure and building decisions simply don't know how viable clean and renewable energy is, and to that end, Energy Alabama has provided instruction to thousands of adults and tens of thousands of K-12 students across the state, and they are working hard to build careers in clean energy and help everyday Alabamians save money on their utility bills. Learn more about their work and how you can join at energyalabama.org.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys of Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs are proud to represent working people in Alabama and across the Southeast. They have over 100 years of experience representing injured workers in workers' compensation, personal injury, and disability claims. Let their attorneys help you when you get injured on the job. You can find them at www.mtandj.com or 855-617-9333. Let Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs help you when you get injured on the job. Again, the website is www.mtandj.com or the phone number 855-617-9333. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services from other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136, out of Central Alabama. Learn more at IBEW136.org.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller, and we were having some issues getting Representative Treadaway on the line, and so Adam was giving us a sort of historical context for these sort of events and these sort of bills in Alabama in the past, and we believe that we've got him on the line now. Representative Treadaway, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You sound great. I appreciate your time today. I do appreciate it. There's, a lot of folks aren't willing to go outside of, where they know that they'll get a little bit of pushback on their ideas, and so we appreciate you being willing to join us. So, last week, your bill, the anti-protest bill, passed the Alabama House of Representatives, and we've been tracking the bill and sounding the alarm about it for a while. We are not shy. We're not in the closet about saying we oppose this bill. So we figured it'd be good to bring you on to talk about your bill and defend it. And that bill has been traveling together with a constitutional carry bill. And so I think it generally makes sense to talk about them together because there's a lot of overlapping things there. It passed the House on the same day as your anti-protest bill, and you voted for it. I'm speaking of the constitutional carry bill. Before we get into your bill, can you tell us why you voted for the constitutional carry bill?
Sure. So obviously, as the chairman of public safety for the last 6 years, working on that bill, actually not allowing the bill to proceed before all the work that the committee had to do on the bill. With that, being in law enforcement myself for 31 years, there was a lot of things that were discovered. There's a lot of things falling through the cracks. We've got a lot of permits out here that we cannot validate. Also, I don't know if you're aware of it, but ATF did an audit, and there was some 208,000 permits issued without the proper background checks. This poses a very serious problem for public safety. Now, I've worked on the streets for 31 years, and I'm going to tell you, I used to think that those permits presented some layer of I wouldn't say security, but confidence that somebody had been checked. Well, what I found out over the last few years, that wasn't the case. And many of these permits being issued without the proper background checks, and the fact that you got 67 sheriffs. Now, think about that for a minute. 67 kingdoms, and they're all issuing a different looking permit. And so you have an officer on the street, whether it's 6 o'clock in the evening or 6 in the morning, and he's got somebody with a weapon. He's presented with a permit. Well, you could print it in your office. Because there was really no way to validate it. So we started having a lot of issues, but it gets a lot deeper. Even as a law enforcement officer, I did not know that there was a lot of things falling through the crack. An example would be a protection order from abuse. You're not supposed to have a weapon. Your permit's invalid at that point. Well, found out that these things wasn't being captured. A lot of our domestic violence convictions are not being captured. We got 400 plus something municipalities. And in any given day, there's a number of people probably convicted of a domestic violence, which forbids you to carry a weapon. So you have a permit. It's now invalid. So what we found with the permitting system was that there were so many flaws in that system. So how do we fix it? Now, what we got to was I worked with the last few years with Representative Pouncey, Robertson. And we came up with the first state to do it. Now, this is Alabama, the first to do something, okay, and other than football. But we're the first to do it. We got a database. This database is a leap forward in public safety, not only for you, but for law enforcement officers. It will hold those folks that are not supposed to be carrying. You may have a valid permit. You may have it issued this week. But in 2 weeks from now, that permit may no longer be valid, but we don't have the means to validate it. So what we're doing with this database is everybody in every case, what the vision is as we move forward, ALEA will be running the database. It'll be housed at their headquarters where CGIS is, with the National Information Crime Center and others. So anytime somebody's convicted or anytime somebody shouldn't have a weapon or is adjudicated a mental defect, it should not have a permit, this database will capture it. So going forward, when that person is ran, and they produce, whether they produce a valid or a fraudulent permit, it's not going to matter once the system's up and running. Is it perfect? No, we're going to work on it. But a lot of states are now looking at Alabama, looking at that database. It's not putting anybody in there that's law-abiding citizen. We're talking about folks that some probate judge may have adjudicated somebody a mental defect. We're going to capture it. So it's not about what you see with other 21 states going to permitless carry and not having a mechanism in place that is far better, in my opinion. It's far better, and I think most of law enforcement will tell you that. So in a nutshell, that's how I've evolved. If you give me this system and you fund it, which took about $500,000 to fund it, about $45,000 each year, then I'm good with moving from permits to permitless carry. Mm-hmm. In addition, 21 states have it. There's been no drop off in permits. There's been no increase in crime. There's 21 states, and none of them have even discussed repealing the law. So we can argue or talk about, well, that's dangerous. But you got to know how we've got to where we're at and why I believe, and many in law enforcement believe, once they understand what we're doing, how this database is a far leap forward into public safety versus just these permits.
Sure. And that argument makes a lot of sense to me.
And I got to say, the database, I'm glad you explained that, because it hasn't been talked about as much in all this. And that is a very common sense. It's one of those things you sort of assumed it already was in place.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that was a very common sense kind of measure.
And it took us years.
Go ahead.
No, it took us years to get there. And because a lot of folks have asked me, I used to be on this side of the fence on that issue. Well, even in law enforcement, I had no idea the problems associated with the permitting process. This is something that was done many, many, many years, decades ago. And we're talking about technology today that can capture these things, and we're not doing it. So anyways, it has been a process for me.
Yeah, well, but you mentioned law enforcement, and the majority, at least from the organized police associations, does seem to be opposed to this bill, like you used to be, and they've come out in force against it. There's been lots of police officers at these hearings, and the main arguments that I've seen coming from those folks against this bill are twofold. One, that it'll make officers less safe, and two, that it'll decrease their ability to use guns as a pretext to investigate somebody further, hindering crime solving. And one by one, on the first contention, the rebuttal was basically, well, we aren't necessarily convinced that's the case, that it would actually decrease officer safety. I think you spoke to some of that. But to the extent that it does, I think that there is, on the people who support permitless carry, there is a broad agreement that even if you stipulate that it does decrease officer safety, even if it does decrease civilian safety, it's worth it because of the Second Amendment, in the same way that it is worth hindering crime-solving abilities to keep the Fourth Amendment intact, because we have this dedication to these principles of people being able to defend themselves and people being protected from unreasonable search and seizure, that we understand that it's possible there could be some bad outcomes, right? That liberty and security are not always totally parallel. That you give up some amount of security, we recognize this, to have freedom, right? And I think that is a lot of the arguments coming from people who are in favor of permitless carry. They're saying that we have to protect our freedoms, and consequences be damned, right? I should be able to carry a gun, and so is that reasoning something that you would basically agree with?
Yeah, listen, right. There's folks passionate about this on both sides of the aisle. My thing as the chairman of public safety, Homeland Security over the last several years is now I have been on both sides of it, where, the critics on both sides have been getting me because I didn't want to move the bill and didn't move the bill. I thought that that's what the legislature was about. We had a process. I was adamant that with nothing else in place, no, I'm firmly here. because the argument about it as a tool is valid in a sense. But then once it evolved to this database and realized that the permits, just think about it, they're out here working and you've got somebody that presents a permit, and there's 67 versions or multiple versions, and you can't validate it. Most of the counties' permit offices are closed at 5 p.m. So who do you call? And then many officers said when you call when they're open, they'll say, well, I need to call you back. But you got somebody on the street with a weapon, but they're producing a permit that you can't validate. So you have to let them go. So and then you have the Second Amendment folks, which is valid. It's enumerated in our Second Amendment. There are some folks that don't think there should be any restrictions on that. I think there is. They don't let you carry bazookas. It was a very difficult situation. But I am proud to say that Alabama has a system moving forward that would capture these things. And I go back to a killing in my own district. An individual who had a valid permit was stopped by the sheriff's office. He produced that valid permit with the weapon he was carrying. Well, what wasn't captured was some weeks earlier, he was given a protection order from abuse from his estranged wife. The sheriff allowed him to move along because of that permit. And that shows how flawed it is. That was on Christmas Day, a number of years ago. He proceeded from that vehicle stop where he produced a weapon and a valid permit. Because the system didn't capture that abuse from protection, he went to his estranged wife's house on Christmas Day and killed her. So these are things that, how many of these things we're not capturing? So I don't think people hear the whole story of how we've evolved to where we're currently at in Alabama and why other states are looking at this database. And some people would refer to it like a sex offender database. We're only putting the people in it that don't need to be carrying a weapon, and we're trying to get it to where it evolves to where it's real time. And keep in mind, this bill, if passes, doesn't take effect to January of 2023, and the database takes effect October of this year. So we're not moving anything unless we have something in place. And this doesn't make everyone happy, but I think it's far better for public safety, and it allows those folks that argue their Second Amendment rights that they don't want to pay a tax to go. They have and it addresses that too.
Right. And so, you broadly agree that, with liberty comes some amount, with freedom comes some amount of insecurity, and that's something that we should accept, specifically with regards to this permitless carry bill, right?
I do, and I see where you're going with that in the next question on the next bill.
Well, I'm glad that you see where I'm going with this, because I think it's really clear, because I can't imagine being in the frame of mind where I believe, as I do, that restrictions on guns are too strict. I believe that there are lots of people. I believe that the gun laws in this country are disproportionately used against marginalized communities, against black and brown folks, against poor white folks, and it penalizes them. And so I think that there's a very good argument for making it easier to own a gun and making it more difficult for police to harass you about owning a gun. I do. But I can't imagine being in that frame of mind and believing that our restrictions on speech and assembly are too loose. Because while we're talking about eliminating the needs for permits for carrying a deadly weapon, citizens have to get a permit from their government just to speak. Just to speak. If you want to do an assembly downtown, I've got to get a permit, okay? Coal miners in Brookwood are on strike right now, and they've been on strike for about a year. And basically the whole year, the state, the government, has said you can only have so many people on your picket lines. At first it was 10, then it was 11, then it was 5, then it was 6. Then for about 3 months they banned it altogether. And now they can have 2 people on a picket line. They can only have 2 people on the picket line. So I believe in the First and the Second Amendment. I think that just like we're moving in Alabama to making it easier to carry firearms, to be able to protect ourselves, to fortify our Second Amendment rights, I think we should be moving to make it easier for people to exercise their constitutional right to speak and assemble. because I think that there are too many restrictions on speech and assembly in this country. And you said that, I don't know how long you've been in the House. I'm assuming it's a while. I'm assuming you've been there a while, at least 4 years. I heard in your testimony that you said this was your anti-protest bill was you are most proud of sponsoring this legislation of any legislation in your career. And you're moving in the direction of restricting speech more. Like, just as a factual statement, that's what's happening with your bill. Whether or not we can, and we will talk about whether that's justified or not. But why do you feel that we are too lax, that we have too much freedom to speak and assemble, but we don't have enough freedom to carry guns?
Okay, that's again, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to come on the show, and I'll be available to talk about this bill to anybody. So let me kind of tell you, kind of explain where I came from with the whole gun issue. So 31 years, and by the way, I've been in the legislature 16 years, and I don't know if this is the best piece of legislation, because I kind of looked at some bills that were controversial, like Narcan, that saves lives, that I'm very proud of. That I've had folks on both sides of the aisle on that one wondering why I was bringing it. And fentanyl strips this year is going to save lives. I've been on the street. I was raised in the inner city of Chicago, and I've worked 31 years in the inner city of Birmingham. So getting back to the protest and freedom of speech, I support that wholeheartedly. I would like to, get your input on what you think about what really happened. So 31 years, I've been on the front lines of the abortion issue, skinheads, KKK, you name it, in Birmingham. We're the civil rights capital of the world. And I kind of like to think we do it right there. We have a good, our law enforcement engages the community well when folks have been trying to catch up and do those things for years. We've always done them in Birmingham and continue to do them, and we'll continue to work at that. But the summer of 2020 and what we all watched is something unlike any protest I've ever seen. I firmly believe the Black Lives Matter chapter in Birmingham was going to be peaceful. We know, these are facts now, we know for a fact that these groups that came in and hijacked that cause, they came into Birmingham, they planted incendiary devices, gasoline, bricks, and sledgehammers. Now, how do we know that? Because when we looked at the crowd and we started investigating this, where did this stuff come from? You've watched it played out on TV. You've seen these folks bashing windows in. By the way, you see more white college-age kids bashing these windows in and setting fires than you do blacks or minorities. So there was a very diverse group. There was approximately 70 people arrested. 2/3 were not even from the community, many of them from out of state. And we know this is a fact. So who's financed this? Who's brought this in? We had a guy at the back of the jail with literally a sack of cash, pre-planned. Why is that? They knew Birmingham had a $300 cash-only bond, okay? So they had to cash steer the bond folks out. While police and firemen were trying to put out the fires and calm the situation, they're rejoining the riots. No doubt in my mind that there was what was started to be a peaceful protest was hijacked. The facts are there. Folks from out of state came in. No protests I've ever seen in 30-something years. And they had these type of elements. Now, I'm going to tell you something. We've got buildings that are 32 stories high in Birmingham. Think about it. These were not Molotov cocktails thrown through the window. They were hell-bent on bringing those buildings down. I was standing next to one that was had an intense flame in it. I couldn't understand why it was so red. That was a box of flares that was set on fire. And if it wasn't for the water suppressant system, we probably had loss of life. So now you got these buildings. You've got maintenance crews in there, cleanup crews, and people working late that are set on fire. Nobody was held accountable. All charges were dropped. At my role at that time, I was the active assistant police chief. Now, when I seen what was happening, by the way, because everybody wants to make this a race issue, by the way, I've never worked for a white mayor. I've worked for built some fine relationships, very diverse relationships in 31 years. And every 6 of my chiefs were African-American, and my department's vastly majority African-American. It was having bricks thrown at them. So because me being referred to as a modern day Bull Connor, I expected all of that. But we've got to be real on what's happening here. So being on the front line and seeing that, Never seeing that before. And the potential of loss of life, I needed to bring a bill and get this discussion going, because the media, the mainstream media, does not want to report, or will not, for some reason, report on the facts that these people were brought. They came into the state, I'm sure using social media and whatever, and they hijacked what was going to be a peaceful protest. So my bill does this. I worked with the Democrats. I've worked with anybody. My bill has no monuments in it like the 8 states have passed it. I refuse to do that. I want the bill to address public safety only. That's protesters, that's police officers, fire, anybody in that area, and property. And so we've got to have this discussion. I'm glad you're having it. I've got a lot of folks saying this suppresses First Amendment, but what if you read the bill, and it only kicks in after the mayor has a curfew violation in play, and those individuals start looting, burning, and assaulting, then this bill kicks in upon conviction. But we do have a holding now. There's the argument about people just
let's go kind of one by one, if you could, because I think that it would be helpful maybe if you read the bill, because that's not what it does. It as far like I'll read the language. I'll read the language and we can talk about it. Riot is defined as, quote, the assemblage of 5 or more persons engaging in conduct which creates, not does, which creates an immediate danger and or results in. See, we've got 2 different things. We've got somebody who define you've got like thought policing in here. You're enabling the police to decide who they believe is creating an immediate danger and or results in damage. It's already illegal to set fire to a building. It's already illegal to set. But let's go on further. Just a second.
Wait a minute. Let me stop you right there. You said take them one by one, so let me stop you right there.
Okay.
So a lot of the definition you're reading is changes to a definition, a current definition that the Democrats didn't like, and I agree need to be updated. So understand, regardless of this bill, you need to be reading what the riot definition in current law and has been there for many decades. The language you're reading is me working across the aisle to update and make the language better. You're never going to get language that's perfect. So let's just assume the bill doesn't even pass. Well, then you live with the definition. If you got a minute, I'll get it for you. But so everybody's forgetting that there's a riot definition on the books and has been that nobody seems to like. The changes you're reading to me is me working across the aisle and trying to make it better. I'm open to any definition, but what I'm not open to is when folks start burning buildings and people are in them and assaulting police officers. I am trying to address that. I'm with you on the First Amendment. This is not somebody that don't agree with that.
Sure. Well, then then we should change the if there's thought policing in the current definition of rioting, then we should eliminate that. But your definition that you like, I don't know what it is currently, and I would support a bill that if the current definition of riot includes thought policing, I would oppose that, and we should take that out. But your definition, the one that you're pushing, does include that. It enables the police to determine who they reckon is creating an immediate danger, and so.
Who else would? But who else would in a situation where they're burning down a city? So how would
burning down a city is illegal already. Burning down a city is illegal already.
You don't understand what the bill's doing is we're trying to update a riot. So all of those things are there, yes. So what does the bill ultimately do? It stiffens penalty. It gives us a 24-hour hold where most states are doing 48. That was a compromise. But if we're going to bond folks out at $300 cash and somebody's there getting all of these folks that are violating a lawful order, understand, read the rest of the bill. It has a curfew violation has to be in play for this to kick in.
I don't believe that's true, because here's what a person commits from the bill. A person commits the crime of riot if, after receiving an order to disperse by a law enforcement officer, so there's no curfew mentioned there, or when in violation of a curfew.
Read the beginning of it.
Or when in violation of a curfew.
You got to read the beginning of that. It says a curfew violation in play. I don't know what version you're looking at, but this was a process in Montgomery. So, yes, what I'm trying to tell you is I hear what you're saying, and I want to work with that. but help me get there, because I think you and I agree that once you start burning, and then to say that there's laws on the books, but they're not sufficient enough. They're not stiff enough. If the law's on the books and we're making arrests and you're joining a riot because somebody's bonding you out, then people argue, well, let's look at the bonds. Let's stiffen them. I am saying yes, but to ignore what is taking place. Do you know that there is in 2020, this is the FBI stats came out, over 60,000 police officers were assaulted. That's just according to FBI, 7.2% increase. And over half of the increase is assault on police while trying to deal with protesters. So I'm just saying, where is that line? Help me get there.
There's a lot of talk about how difficult, how much danger police are in, and no doubt it is a dangerous job, but it's not even like in the top 10. Logging, being a driver, these things are more difficult, and most of the danger, in fact,
you might want to look. Well, you might want to relook. There's 58% increase on officer homicide, officers' intentional murder this year alone. They haven't seen numbers like this in decades. I think the numbers you're looking at, while valid, yes, I agree, but I don't think they apply in the last 24 months. I think you're going to see a much difficult situation.
But most of the dangers that police officers face are not actually, in fact, from like homicide or assaulting. And of course, again, like, it's illegal to kill people, right? It's illegal to kill people.
Well,
it's illegal to assault people, and people get arrested for that, and people get and people are tried and convicted for that. But most of the danger from law enforcement, actually, there was I can't remember, but it was significantly more police officers died from COVID than from people killing them, and significantly more people died from being in car accidents as a police officer. So there's a certain amount of everybody, mainstream media likes
to. There's no comparison to that and intentional murder assaults on police officers. Let me tell you what's happening.
Sir, if I can say real quick,
sure.
I wanted to interject here because, I trust that the statistics you're telling me are accurate. I don't know otherwise. What I also know in the past 24 months is a whole lot of civilians have been hurt by police. We've witnessed it here in Huntsville, where it was the civilians on the receiving end of the violence. Mm-hmm. There's no dispute about that. That is just the facts on the ground. And I think as we all saw these protests play out on TV, we saw plenty of civilians who were subjected to tear gas, to pepper spray, to various quote-unquote non-lethal munitions, people who were dragged, hit, kicked.
Lost eyes.
So, and that's not because I'm trying to absolve folks of committing violence against law enforcement. Of course, Jacob and I and the people who listen to us, we're all 100% nonviolent kind of folks. We don't condone that. But we also can't condone police officers committing violence on civilians, which has...
And there's no ramifications for that. I don't know that...
Large.
But
it's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, it is the exception that police officers are held accountable for their violations of civilians' rights rather than the rule, whereas the rule for civilians violating the rights of cops is that we are held accountable. But we're not talking about... That's not the bill, and the bill is about, there is part of that, and I do want to ask you about it. But to be arrested and convicted, and again, the mandatory holding time. I was not in Birmingham, but it is very difficult for me to believe that in the same night people were bailed out and were able to participate in the same protest, because in Huntsville,
I've never seen a jail that efficient.
Yeah, in Huntsville, what happened, and I know people that were arrested in Huntsville, and they had their charges dropped because they were bogus, because there was no property damage or anything by protesters in Huntsville. The property damage was done by the police on a coffee shop. One of their rounds hit a coffee shop's window, and the protesters actually fundraised to repair the coffee shop's window. That wasn't the police; that was the protesters that did that. And so, what I saw in Huntsville was people were arrested and they were kept overnight and they were not able to be bailed out overnight, and they lost jobs. They lost jobs just without the mandatory 24-hour holding time. They lost jobs as the law stands today. And so I've got a real difficult time with believing that we should hold people who are by definition innocent.
Well,
by definition innocent for
hold
24 hours, and you don't even have to be convicted of riot. Under this definition, you do not have to have damaged any property or hurt a single hair on a person's head. And I don't think that's okay when we're talking about locking people in a cage in some of the most dangerous facilities in the country for 30 days. You will lose jobs, you will lose your home, you will potentially lose your family, you'll lose your kids, and you don't have to have damaged any property or hurt a single person. Like, I have a problem with that.
So listen, I appreciate your point of view on this, and you're talking about your experience and what you saw in Huntsville. I know you wasn't in Birmingham, but you certainly saw buildings being smashed and looted and pawn shops with weapons and fires being set. Mm-hmm. Now, I was there at that one, so I'm not going to sit and tell you, and this legislation was born out of that. 8 states have passed it. 32 are looking at it. Mine is the least restrictive in all of them because I hear you. But we also got to recognize we have to have law and order. And listen, I represented cops for decades, and then I rose through the ranks to assistant chief, where I was on the end of firing officers, sending them, disciplining them, days off, all the way up to termination, sending them to prison. So we can always do better there. But the demonization of this profession over the last few years is having chilling effects on our society. And I predict will get much worse. We're in the middle of a crime wave. We've got to have law and order. We've got target on law enforcement officers' backs. And let me tell you what's going on. And I'm sure it's going on in most cities across America, because I read about Seattle the other day, lost 350 officers in 24 months. They've been only able to recruit and retain 130 some odd cops. They're in critical shortages. They're paying bonuses to get officers. In Birmingham, they're 100, 150 or more short. In the last year and a half, I can tell you without question that we've tried to hire anywhere between 45 and 60 in a class. We're lucky they just started one a couple of weeks ago with just 10 officers. Then the months it will take to get them out of the academy, we will lose 3 times that on the street. These are, and what we don't talk about is how high the crime is in the areas of minority communities. They don't deserve to live in a war zone. They don't deserve to be scared to live at home. Now, with that said, we have got to see how we want to proceed. And I hear what you're saying about Huntsville and what somebody may say somewhere else. I am trying to get to the point where we recognize what took place in Birmingham. The laws on the books are not stiff enough to deal with it, period.
Well, but it wasn't just a second. It wasn't the laws on the books that were not stiff enough. The DA decided that the charges were bogus and didn't pursue them. So we can quibble about whether or not the DA was right, but the DA could drop charges under this bill. The DA could not pursue charges under this bill, and it would be exactly the same. We're not talking about the law not being stiff enough. You're disagreeing with the DA's enforcement of the law, and so that's totally different. But no, I'm talking about Birmingham. You said Birmingham. All 70 people who were arrested had their charges dropped.
You're not sitting there suggesting in no way of what you've watched on TV with all these people bashing and burning buildings. You're not suggesting that the 70 folks arrested, all charges dropped, wasn't politically motivated?
I don't know. I don't know. And I think probably no. Hold on. Just a second. I think probably most of it was bogus. I think probably most of it was bogus because of the world that we live in.
I don't speak that way about Huntsville. I wasn't in Huntsville.
Sure,
I'm telling you,
that was the DA's. That we're not talking about. The laws were not strict enough. We're talking about the DA decided that these charges didn't apply or that he didn't want to enforce the law. We're not talking about the restrictions not being stiff enough. So your law wouldn't do anything about that. And
prosecute.
Right.
DAs will have discretion to use political.
They're
judgment.
political offices.
Right.
Right.
Regardless of this legislation or otherwise. In fact, that's one of our concerns about it is you now have more punishment at their discretion.
And you were talking about kind of getting away from the riot, just about the general crime, and you said that you don't believe that people should live in crime-ridden communities, and I totally agree. I think we would probably disagree about what we do about that, because we don't see a lot of crime in suburbs, and generally speaking, it's because people in suburbs are better off. And so I think that we should be looking at making people in inner cities, making people in poor communities better off, maybe social programs, things like that, rather than law enforcement, because that doesn't seem to have worked. But that's not what we're talking about. The riot bill increases, it gives this mandatory minimum holding time, and it increases the you being held in a cage in some of the most dangerous facilities in the country to 30 days, and you do not have to have damaged any property or hurt a single person to be convicted under this law. Like, you have a disagreement with the DA.
30 days. The 30 days is after conviction. We have to trust our system. But,
But I'm talking about conviction. You can be convicted under this law, and you haven't hurt anybody. You haven't damaged any property. I'm talking about conviction. I don't think that's right. I don't think there should be a law.
That's not true. What
Yes,
part of the
true.
bill? It's not. You got to be convicted of.
Brother, come on.
Read the definition. All right, let me tell you about domestic violence just for a second, because this was argued, with domestic violence. People say we don't hold people. We do. And I started policing, and I remember a young lady in Inslee, Grad City, where I used to patrol, and she was beat so bad, and I knew it was her husband. But she said her sister had come over, and they got into a fight. Well, the laws on the books did not allow us to arrest anybody. They changed because people were dying, people were being assaulted. And it changed to where when we come in, we have the discretion to try to determine who's the offender. And if we can't, we take both of them in. And it's a cooling down period. We put them in jail and we hold them. And the reason is because too many people are dying. It turned out to be very effective, and it's saving a lot of lives. We do it for DUI. I have lost 2 of my members to a drunk driver, okay? So we hold them. I lost my daughter, who was a school teacher, to a drunk driver who had multiple arrests. All right. And that was just 4 years ago yesterday. So don't tell me we don't evolve in these laws, and we do. We got to look at them. I'm telling you, I agree with this debate. I'm with you. I don't want to make it so argumentative, but people could have died in those buildings that were set on fire. They were intentionally set. We've got people coming into these towns, hijacking what you're looking at and I look at and used to look at as completely peaceful type protests. And I know the country's evolved to the better because of these protests. And yes, they've got out of hand. I get it, but we're seeing something different. So I am open to continue to work this process and work this bill. But I do believe that and I think you would agree with me, let's say it's that person that's bashing the window and they are setting a fire and they are throwing bricks at cops,
which is illegal. Already.
Well, you're not let me hear. You're not hear me out. So if I want to stiffen that penalty and hold you, and you're caught on the camera and say we got you, you still don't agree with the hold, the 24 hours to calm the situation that many times doesn't take. It takes days. That these situations need to be calm. So what I'm saying to you, if we can get it down and we can assure with video and hold you accountable for setting that fire, you still don't agree with that person being held for 24 hours because you let him right back out. I'm going to tell you what that type of person's going to do. It could be you that get your head bashed in. It could be your home that gets set on fire. We've got to decide.
Right, and it could be me that gets shot in a Walmart because somebody doesn't feel like they need to have a permit, and I'm okay with that because I believe in having the freedom. But you can't do that. You can't prove something without a trial because we're innocent until proven guilty in this country. I believe that's one of the most important things that we have in this country is a right to trial, and you just simply can't prove that without the trial. And that's not even that's even totally removed from what your bill does. I just want to drill down because you're disputing that you can be arrested and convicted without having damaged any property or hurt any person. You do not believe that a person would that you do not believe that you could convict a person for riot under your bill if they have not damaged any property or hurt a person. But your definition of riot is the assemblage of 5 or more persons engaging in conduct which creates an immediate danger.
It's been on the books. It's an update and a better definition that's been on the books for decades. We give police officers, I know you don't like that a police officer gets discretion out here, but you wouldn't be able to walk the streets or live in the comfort that you do if it wasn't given these discretions given. Can we have a better trained police department? Absolutely. Can we do better and engage in the community? Need to do better. But don't sit and argue a definition or other definitions that are on the books, whether it's DUIs or domestics or assaults, or that we give officers discretion on. You're taking a definition that's worse than been on the books.
So you believe the officers
trying to update the definition.
Well, I don't look. I mean, if the definition includes thought policing, I think that we should get rid of that. But your definition includes thought policing. It says that you create an immediate danger. You haven't damaged anything. You haven't hurt anybody. It's just the people.
Look at the word saying. Look at engaging and resulting in, which is an update, which means you have to be engaging in that behavior, and it has to result in. Those type of violations.
and or engaging in conduct which creates an immediate danger of, and or results in. We've got there's 2 different things that you can be convicted of rioting for. You can be convicted of rioting for creating an immediate danger of damage to property, or you can be convicted of rioting for engaging in conduct which results in damage to property or injury to persons. Like, do you not recognize that?
Listen, do you not recognize that definition is unlike, there's many throughout our laws. You have to give discretion, and you have to train your law enforcement officers to do the job, to go out there and keep folks from losing their lives. I never thought we'd live in a time that police are the fault of all of society's ills. You and listen, I agree. I've worked and grew up in inner city. And I've got a brother that took other routes in life, and he's been in the penitentiary many years of his life. We have to hold people accountable. We have to have law and order. You give me the perfect definition. Now, I'll tell you this, there are laws on the books for this, but they don't go far enough. There's a necessity to have a hold now. Many states are seeing that, and it's not to trample on people's First Amendment rights. I am trying to zone in on those very serious violators that put lives in danger here. And I'm still open to working on that, because I do not want somebody who is peacefully protesting being arrested. But when did we stop holding people accountable for non-compliance? The mayor of Birmingham had a curfew violation in play. There was lawful orders given on a bullhorn. We had undercover officers in the crowd so they can testify that they heard it clearly. And then some people refused to leave. One young lady said, "I did nothing but sit on the bench." Well, no, there's a curfew violation in play. We've told you an hour and a half every 15 minutes that people will be arrested if you don't disperse. And then you didn't walk away from where the buildings were starting to be looted and set on fire. Mm-hmm. You walked towards it. So my question.
So she should be locked in a cage for 30 days. Okay, glad that we agree.
No. The bill don't say that, brother. Don't listen. If you don't agree with me, don't add stuff to it.
Well,
no, it does not. Let me finish what I'm saying.
Sure.
I'm asking you that question. If this person, where there's a violation of a curfew violation, a lawful order to disperse, is headed towards the rioting situation, what do you expect police officers to do? To put their lives in danger? My question is, they would be arrested for failure to disperse under the bill I got, or curfew violation, and neither of that results in a 30-day or a 24-hour hold. So, again, I see where you're coming from, and I'm hearing you. It's a process in Montgomery. I'm still willing and open to work on this, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I'm not locking in and arguing with you, saying what you're saying is not valid. I agree, but where is that point of safety for everyone involved?
Yeah.
So
can I interject here, Jacob, if you don't mind? And I do want to say I appreciate that you're willing to even have this discussion.
Yeah, like we said, a lot of people,
yeah.
A lot of people don't want to talk to people who disagree with them.
Yeah, I give
They
you
like
a lot
their
of credit
echo
for
chambers.
that. And you're right. It is a process in terms of, one word can make a difference and one word can be changed many times in this process. So that does make it difficult to look at the fine details here. And what you're getting at is like an essential question of where is the line between protecting public safety versus protecting public First Amendment rights. I mean, that's one of the long debates of the history of our country. So, and it's the three of us aren't going to solve that necessarily right here this morning. So, all that said, a couple of the one thing that you mentioned that really made me think was in terms of, the lawful order to disperse or at what point do we hold people accountable for disobedience. I respect that coming from, law enforcement. Your job, enforce the laws. If people don't follow the laws, you're supposed to act. I get that. But I also get, just as a student of history and as an activist for most of my adult life, that civil disobedience has been a great engine of change throughout this country. And that, this legislation could have easily been targeted at any of our, grandfathers and grandmothers who were out there in the civil rights movement or in the labor movement or any other, social movement that, yes, at times disobeyed laws in order to make a point, in order to raise consciousness, in order to, win gains for ordinary people. And so, I say all that just to say that, I think that's worth remembering from law enforcement, from people of your political persuasion as well, that's one area we're coming from. And I'm sure the Black Caucus, I know, has been really hammering home that point as well. And it sounds like you're really trying to engage in dialogue with them and hear them out, which I really do appreciate. But, that's what really bothers me is when I hear these discussions, I see images from history. I see our forefathers in Gadsden trying to organize a union in the 30s. I see Dr. King and John Lewis and all the brothers and sisters out there trying to win the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act. And I see where this could send a chilling effect on everyday average Alabamians' desire and willingness to exercise their freedom of speech and assembly. And I respect your concern in terms of demonization of the police. No one wants to be demonized. As a former teacher, that resonates with me because teachers are also blamed a lot of times for all kinds of, society's ills. I get that, but I don't think a solution is to demonize protest or to increase the capacity to discourage protest and assembly with the long and violent arm of the state, because ultimately that's what we're talking about here, armed agents of the state. Whatever their intentions in joining the police, however good a person they may be, doing their shift, at the end of the day, they are armed agents of the government. And, so those things are it's just incredibly complex. And that's my concern. And I think really what I mentioned earlier before we got you on the line is this really going to be for everybody? Is this bill going to be enforced equally across all lines? Is every type of person going to be treated the same way? Because based on the history of the state, based on our current conditions, I don't believe it. I have a hard time believing that the left would be treated the same as the right, or that minorities would be treated the same as whites, or that Muslims would be treated the same as Christians. I just have a hard time believing that, and therefore it's just hard for me to accept that, law enforcement should have more tools in their arsenal to detain people and to ruin people's lives, because anyone arrested under this, their life is probably going to be ruined. And that's heavy to put that out there, that we're going to ruin some people's lives. That's just a really heavy thing. And it sounds to me like you recognize it's a really heavy thing, and it's something that you're out here engaged in this dialogue, and I do give you a lot of credit for that, because the consequences for something like this can be so far-reaching and can really resonate throughout history. And I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, listen, I agree with you on that and the history and all that, but I also am seeing something where if we have, or these protests are under attack and actually are being hijacked, and somebody outside is funding all of this, and I'm putting lives in danger. I'm trying to get to the point, and laws have evolved over the years. There was a time right before I started in law enforcement that you could shoot a fleeing felon in the back. Well, my gosh, I certainly don't agree with that.
Right.
But that's where the laws were. We don't do that now. We don't shoot unless there's an active threat to your life.
Right. They're not supposed to.
Well, yeah, I know, but there's like 60 million
I hear you.
interaction with. We seem to always, and rightfully so, but when an officer goes bad, and we seem to second guess it. They're human beings trying to do a job. The George Floyd thing, there's not a single officer I've ever met that looked at that and went, "What the hell happened here?" Right. And we agree with that. But
Representative, real quick, I'm trying to interrupt you, but I didn't really hear this earlier. But I think you shared that your daughter had passed away as a result of a drunk driving accident. Is that correct?
Yeah,
and I just want to express my condolences, because no parent should ever have to bury their child. No. And I didn't want you to think that we were glossing over that. It was just kind of hard to hear as we were getting this interview going. But I do want to express sympathy.
Thank you. I rarely ever bring it up, but it was she was 31 years old. She was a school teacher and head coach at high school, and an individual who obviously had previous records of DUIs and arrest, and hit her. And my other children are having a fundraiser today. We do scholarships, and we'll be having a fundraiser starting this afternoon. But yes, people out here have to be held accountable. I mean that sincerely. I'm born in Alabama, raised in inner city Chicago. My dad was a cab driver, and he was also killed in 1979 by an impaired driver. And I feared that my whole life, and I fear it now. So there's a lot of issues out here. My concern is innocent people dying, and that includes protesters. I truly, honestly believe that the hardest part of this thing is being labeled a racist, undercover for 31 years, and I'm not going to let that steer me from my concern for people and working in the city. I worked 31 years there. Check my history. I went up through the ranks. I've never been accused of excessive force or discourteous behavior. Don't pat me on the back, because most 90-something% of cops are like that. And I have built relationships that are very diverse, but I just never seen what I seen in Birmingham in my life. And when people, and I've got the facts on it, this is not something I'm making up. If we truly do have an issue that needs to be raised, and I truly believe in the First Amendment and protest to raise those concerns, but there's groups coming in that cannot give a damn about that, and coming in and hijacking whatever cause it is. It could be a Black Lives Matter today. It could be another cause tomorrow. We've never seen this before, and I'm trying to bring attention to it. I'm trying to address it, and it is very difficult. I don't want to suppress anybody's First Amendment rights, but I do want to grab the guy that's setting the fire in the building. I do want to grab the guy that's thrown the brick, girl that's bashed in your head as a protester, or someone else's, or a public safety. I do want to grab that person, and I do want that person to deal with severe consequences and stiffer penalties, because yes, a lot of these laws are on the books. There's a couple on there that are not. The aiding and abetting, and who's funding this. If somebody's coming into a town taking your calls over.
Yeah, well, that's a good that's a good transition, I think, because there are two more. We've only got 10 more minutes left on the radio. You've been very generous with your time. We appreciate that. There are two more bits of the bill that I wanted to get to before we wrapped, and that is the bit about, you talked about, and you said that we've never seen that before, but of course we have seen in almost every protest movement we do hear talk, from the authorities about outside agitators and things like this. So it's not. I don't know that it's as uncommon as you think. But in the bill, from reading straight from the bill, you say that a person commits the crime of inciting to riot if he or she commands, solicits, incites, funds, urges, or otherwise aids and abets another person in a riot or aggravated riot. Blah blah blah. 30 days. And it seems to me, I donated to bail funds personally, because I felt like a lot of people were being arrested improperly, including here in Huntsville. I donated to the Huntsville Bail Fund, and I'm proud to say that I did, because I know some of the people that were arrested, and I believe that they were arrested unlawfully, and their charges were dropped because I think that they were bogus. It seems to me that this would put me in prison for 30 days. It seems to me that I would have a mandatory holding time before conviction of 24 hours, and that I would be put in some of the most dangerous prisons in the country for 30 days. I would lose my job. I would lose my house. I would lose, children if I had them. How do you justify that when I believe people have a right to pay people's bail if they want? I think that we have a right to do that. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say you're reading into that definition totally wrong. That has to do with folks are aiding and abetting, folks that are burning and looting stores. The law books have all kinds of definitions in there, and that's why we have the greatest system in the world. And we have to have folks on the front line. We have to have folks complying with the law. And if they don't, they go into the system. And you have your court system, you have your judges, your juries, and you got to trust the system. It's the best system in the world. You cannot have complete lawlessness. You cannot have, when you have curfews and things, we are very lenient about a lot of these things. I've worked these front lines, and we don't make these arrests, but once it breaks out and you start looting, and yes, then we have to use every tool, whether it's the curfew or the lawful order to disperse, to leave. Now, are we all going to agree on everything? Listen, I'm coming from a different perspective. I worked 31 years in law enforcement, and what I'm seeing today and what's happening to that profession, we're all going to pay for that. And I promise you, everything's secular. It will get worse in our society. You trust me. You're young enough to live long enough. You're going to watch it get much worse, but it will get better, because they will be good people who will stand up and say enough's enough. We cannot have groups coming in hell-bent on destruction. We have to have laws on the books, and we have to give, where we probably disagree, we have to give this latitude, this discretion to our law enforcement officers. We have to train them. Specifically
about the funding. I mentioned that I gave money to bail people out of prison. I think that you could not unreasonably, under this definition, say that I'm funding a riot.
Do you believe
that I would be put? Do you believe that it would be right for me to be thrown in a cage for 30 days?
No, absolutely not. That's your right to do that, and there's no officer I know would take a charge like that to a DA or a DA that would give you a warrant on that. We're talking about who's paying for the incinerator devices and the bricks and the sledgehammers. Who's funding that? Who is sending people to the state? And it's a high bar, but if you can prove that you're sending them in from out of state, they're paying for their hotel rooms, paying for their incinerator devices and gasoline, and go back and prove that it was intentionally done to set these buildings on fire, hell yeah, you got to go to jail. And there's got to be a line, guys. And I'm willing to stay open to working on the bill. I'm still open to it. I'm willing to work with anybody that I can. Or we can sit and argue this all day long, and people can come into our cities and they can be lost to life, because I tell you something, the fire department, time they got in and got those fires out, and we got those buildings vacated. If it wasn't for the water suppressant systems in those buildings, some older buildings would have went down. And that's the only thing. So there is a serious situation here that we truly cannot ignore. And I knew when I retired, I even told the mayor and I told my children that I'm going to be under attack. And I said, but I have to be bringing this discussion to the legislature. I have to bring it. I had 31 years. I always intended to retire at 30, but after my wife passed, my kids promised, I said, I'll work one more year, Dad. And I did one more year, but I had to leave because I knew to bring this bill, it was not fair to my city. It was not fair to the Birmingham Police Department to have activists protesting police headquarters, which would have happened. So this was something that's very dear to me, and we'll continue this dialogue. I appreciate you guys invite, because I want to talk to everybody about it, and I just want to see where that medium is. And sometimes, I don't know where it's at, but I'm willing to work.
And I appreciate that. The last thing that I wanted to ask, and then we'll wrap up. Again, appreciate you taking your time. Was the assault on a first responder that includes a causing or attempt to causing a first responder to come into contact with bodily fluids, and it defined bodily fluids including saliva, and that comes with a 6-month prison sentence. And look, like, I've been spat on personally. It's not fun. I wouldn't recommend it for people being spat on, and I wouldn't recommend people do that. I don't think that's okay. But I also wouldn't want to, throw the person who spat on me in a cage for 6 months. So what's your response to that?
So you're looking at a definition that has other things involved in it. It's not just not that. My question to you is this: don't spit in my face when I'm out there trying to keep peace.
I'm not. I wouldn't, and I wouldn't advocate people do it. But I also don't think people should be thrown in jail for half a year.
Don't throw feces on me, and don't take your umbrellas and tape nails to the end of them. You notice these protests around the country don't use horses. Their horses are really good crowd control, but they don't use them because they're taping nails on them. Not the locals, but the same type of groups that are coming in, and they're puncturing these dogs and horses, and that's why you have them included, because people want to go, why you got a horse in here getting assaulted?
Right.
Like
so.
That.
Really quick though, like 2 more minutes. No comment on throwing people in prison for 6 months for spitting on cops.
Yeah, sure. I think that you're looking at a definition that includes other violations.
It does,
there. But listen, to my kids, be in compliance, come home safe, and don't spit in the officer's face. And
Definitely.
Guess what? You don't
do that.
You don't sit in a jail. It's
sure.
real
So you
simple,
think people should go in jail for 6 months if they spit on cops?
I think you're reading into another definition that nobody's going to stay 6 months. No, I don't believe anybody, to answer your question, would stay in jail for 6 months for just merely spitting on somebody. No. But do I think they should be held accountable for that conduct? Just like I would hold somebody accountable for spitting in your face, if I saw it, would be arrested.
Representative Treadaway, we do appreciate your time. You've been very generous. Thank you for jumping on, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. We do appreciate it.
Sure. I appreciate you guys and what you're doing. And hey, listen, call me anytime, and hopefully the bill will evolve, and we'll see where it goes ultimately.
We will, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you much. So yeah, we've been speaking to Representative Treadaway. We are just about to wrap up here on the radio. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. If you want to continue listening to the program, we do continue for another hour and a half online, so you can find us on YouTube or on Facebook. We've got some really, really great stuff for you in the other half. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right. Yeah, so let's go ahead and nix the clean feed. All right.
Do we need to do a break? We need a break. What do you think, Jacob? I mean, that was an intense conversation for over an hour.
Yeah, I was not expecting it to go that long.
I wasn't either. I will say we have Chris, our brother from Local 98, does appear to be in the waiting room. So how about we take a little break?
Yeah, let's
follow up with Chris, and
Yeah, really quickly before we go to break and bring Chris on the line, DSA's fundraising for striking Alabama coal miners is still up. You can donate through the end of the month. I'll be on Ben Burgess's show on YouTube on Monday, debunking anti-union arguments, so you should tune into that. You can leave us a voicemail, 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857. We've got a new hat. You can go to our store, unionly.io/o/TVLR. No caps. You can pre-order it. Pre-orders in March 11th. You can expect delivery by mid-April, and you can become a sustaining member of the program at the same place, unionly.io/o/TVLR. That is it for this half of the program. We're going to be talking about more stories that the media ignores in favor of sensationalized culture war stuff, which we weren't. We're going to get to some of the stuff that we didn't get to in the first half of the program. We'll be talking about Starbucks retaliation. We'll be talking about wage theft. And we will be talking to Christopher Doles, the president of IFPTE Local 98. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Energy Alabama supports consumers and is a leader in advocating for them. They have been able to successfully fight off utility rate increases in the state, reduce fees for electric vehicles, increase electric vehicle infrastructure spending, and they secured a $100 million refund by Alabama Power after the utility overcharged customers for fuel. To learn more about their work advocating for customers and to join the fight, go to energyalabama.org.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBEW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBEW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBEW558.org.
The attorneys of Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs are proud to represent working people in Alabama and across the Southeast. They have over 100 years of experience representing injured workers in workers' compensation, personal injury, and disability claims. Let their attorneys help you when you get injured on the job. You can find them at www.mtandj.com or 855-617-9333. Let Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs help you when you get injured on the job. Again, the website is www.mtandj.com or the phone number 855-617-9333. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services from other law firms. North Alabama DSA is looking for folks to work for a better North Alabama. They prioritize mutual aid, municipal activism, and union solidarity. Contact them on social media or dsanorthalabama@gmail for more information.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at IAMAW44.org.
Hometown Action is a proud sponsor of the Valley Labor Report, and we're here to help keep you in the loop on the assault on your right to protest, picket, and peaceably assemble in Alabama. The anti-protest bill is back this year, and it's as bad as ever. There is huge interest in building worker power and increasing unionization in Alabama that has corporations scared. Don't let their influence on our state legislators become another tool to arrest striking workers and union supporters. This racist bill is especially problematic for black organizers and unnecessarily gives law enforcement broad discretion to define even small peaceful gatherings as a riot. Tell your Alabama legislators to say no to House Bill 2. We've set up an easy way for you to do that. You can go to hmtn.link/HB2 where you'll find more information and an email template you can use right from your smartphone. That link is hmtn.link/HB2. You'll also find more info on social media at Hometown Action.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Labor creates all wealth. All wealth should go to labor. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host and fellow agitator is Adam Keller, and we just wrapped up a 1-hour conversation. My God, that was much longer than I anticipated, with Alan Treadaway. He's an Alabama state representative, a former cop, and author of the anti-protest bill that just passed the Alabama House of Representatives. Per a message from one state senator that we received, a Republican state senator, mind you, it's not like it was a Democrat. Per a message from one Republican state senator, it has no chance in the Alabama Senate in its current form, and there is not an appetite to quote-unquote fix it. So let's hope he's right, and it dies in the Senate. Maybe we can debrief after we finish, Adam. Maybe we can debrief for a second after we finish our conversation with Chris, because like I don't know, it just seemed that was a lot. That was I'm still processing some of it. It's like he didn't want. It seemed like he did not want to own up to what he was doing. He was always saying, "You're reading too much into it. You're reading too much into it," and it's like, all I'm doing, man, is reading the bill. Like, if you don't reckon it shouldn't be enforced that way, you shouldn't write it that way. You know, that's all I'm not, right. I wasn't,
Which is, and honestly, that's where, you and I tend to agree with small government, quote unquote, type of people.
Yeah.
Like, you don't give government, you don't give government these authorities unless you are willing to use them.
Yeah. I'm not, he's talking about when I was talking, like, he said that he doesn't think you should sit in a cage for 6 months if you spit on a cop, okay?
Right.
But that's in the damn bill, okay?
Right.
As is written, a properly motivated district attorney could throw somebody in prison for 6 months. If they prosecuted those charges for spitting on a cop, the judge would have no choice but to put somebody in 6 months. And again, like he's saying, I'm not going to go around spitting on cops. I have been spat on. I don't recommend it. I don't enjoy it. And I don't spit on people because, I'm an adult. But also, because I'm an adult, I wouldn't want people who spit on me to be thrown in some of the most dangerous prisons on our planet.
Right. I would take an apology.
I would take an apology. Yeah, that would be nice.
They could just stop doing it. That would just be sufficient for me.
Right.
No handcuffs required.
No
just
handcuffs.
Don't do it, bro.
I wouldn't. Yeah, and he said something about I would. People would be held accountable if they spit on you, and a cop saw it. And I'm like, for one, I doubt it.
Also, our definitions of accountability probably look different.
Yeah, but for one, I doubt it. I doubt if a cop sees somebody spit on me, they're going to arrest them. But even if they did, I would not want them to. So anyway, I don't know. We'll talk some more about it after we finish with Chris. Our next guest is Christopher Doles. He is the president of IFPTE Local 98, representing federal employees at the Army Corps in New York. Chris, thanks for taking the time this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's really good to be here.
Great. So Chris is here to talk about the U.S. Senate's and Chuck Schumer's seeming reluctance, their delay on approving President Joe Biden's nomination to the Federal Labor Relations Authority and the Merit Systems Protection Board. So we've got a lot of folks in the audience who are not federal employees, And even some federal employees are going to be like, what the hell's that? So, Chris, what the hell is that? What are those two agencies?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much again for the opportunity. Folks have probably heard of the National Labor Relations Board, right? That is the federal agency responsible for managing labor relations or, interpreting contracts and resolving disputes related to labor relations in the private sector. Well, the federal sector has its own agency for that same purpose, and that is the Federal Labor Relations Authority. It was created by the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, and it is the body responsible for governing labor relations in the federal sector for the 2.1 million of us federal employees. So, it's the largest union employer in the country. It's almost the largest employer in the country, second to Walmart. And it's an important sector for a lot of reasons. It's a pace setter. It's, Trump used his influence to try to break the unions in the federal sector. Biden is attempting to use his influence to try to repair some of that damage. Being that it's in the executive branch, it's the most direct influence that a president has in terms of labor relations. And so it serves as a bit of a bellwether for policy, in general. Dating back to the PATCO strike in 1981, that was the early days of the Civil Service Reform Act and the early days of the Federal Labor Relations Authority. And it's the way that Ronald Reagan kind of drew the line against labor and set the tone for, I would say, the decades ever since. So Federal Labor Relations Authority is a really important agency for all federal employees. I would say it's important for all Americans because the quality of labor relations in the federal government informs the quality of the service that we provide. And there's obviously many services that we provide the American population. And then very briefly, the Merit Systems Protection Board is another independent agency within the federal government responsible for hearing appeals for any number of personnel actions that may happen in a federal workplace. So if you are fired or you are discriminated against in one way or another, you can have recourse by appealing those decisions up to the Merit Systems Protection Board. It's responsible for upholding the merit principles, which of course are a very important part of civil service. Merit principles are what replaced, old cronyism and favoritism, and it's been in place for more than 100 years. And the nominees that President Biden has sent to the Senate they would give the quorum that the Merit Systems Protection Board needs to do its job. They haven't had quorum in 5 years. That was a deliberate choice by Chuck Schumer's predecessor, Mitch McConnell. He chose not to process Trump's, albeit I'm sure, terrible nominees. He chose not to process them to maintain an absence of quorum in order to make sure that none of these appeals can be heard. So for the past 5 years, a caseload of more than 4,000 appeals have gone unheard. Wow. There's 4,000 caseload backlog. And it's one of the many ways that the small government fundamentalists like Trump and McConnell have sought to undermine the purpose of the federal government. And that the FLRA, it's a different tactic. They've stacked it with anti-labor members. Most importantly, of course, are the two that make up the current majority. That's James Abbott and Colleen Duffy-Kiko. The two of them have, over the course of the last 4+ years, ruled, stepped way outside of what would be reasonable jurisprudence and overturned some 75% of the decisions in front of them, of the arbitrators' decisions in front of them, almost uniformly against unions. Any pretense of neutrality has been out the window, and Trump's war on federal workers effectively continues more than a year into Biden's administration.
Right. That's 4,000 cases in the Merit Systems Protection Board that have not been adjudicated. That is huge. What are the kind of cases, or what are some of the cases that have not been adjudicated that have been? Has it been sort of precedent setting for federal employees that these cases that they're just sitting unanswered?
Yes. I mean, the Merit Systems Protection Board has relative to the FLRA, has a relatively narrow impact with each case. And so the absence of decisions isn't so much setting precedent as just gumming up the works, where the precedent is getting set, which is really dangerous. And it's not just the precedents that were set under Trump's years, but it's ongoing. Every decision coming out of the FLRA is new precedent, and the unions cannot afford to appeal every single one of them to the district court. The ones that they do all get overturned, and thank goodness for those. In fact, Ketanji Brown Jackson is the author of the most recent decision, throwing out a really awful decision by the FLRA that basically changed the obligation of agencies to negotiate changes in conditions of employment. I'll give that example because if you're looking for an example, it's a good one, because part of our talking points around this, we have an open letter to Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer is, our senator here in New York, but he's obviously the majority leader. So in a sense, we're all his constituents. And we are trying to convince him to prioritize these nominations because the precedents are so bad. So just to take this one example, the original Civil Service Reform Act that gave rise to current modern federal labor relations law, it enshrined a compromise between the unions and the agencies. It's a very different compromise than that which enshrined the National Labor Relations Board. But the federal unions gave up a bunch of important things. They have an extremely narrow scope of bargaining. We can't negotiate over wages. We can't negotiate over benefits. We have no right to strike. We're not even allowed to assert the right to strike. So there's a whole raft of restrictions that don't apply to the rest of the rest of the labor movement and other American workers. In exchange for those things, federal workers were guaranteed the right to negotiate procedures and arrangements that relate to their conditions of employment. And it's really important when you take the right to strike and the right to assert the right to strike, and you take the right to negotiate wages and benefits, when you take all those things off the table, then what stands is really important to uphold. So what's been happening over the last few years has been the steady chipping away. Trump did it through big executive orders, but also the FLRA majority that's still in place is continuing to chip away. I call it death by 1,000 cuts. And this one most recent decision that was overturned further constricts the scope of bargaining so that no longer are agencies required even to do that little bit we have, which is negotiate procedures and arrangements related to conditions of employment. At least now it becomes the obligation of the union to demonstrate that there's a substantial impact. Previously, they basically had to do it for anything greater than de minimis. And so this all taken together represents a constriction of the rights of federal employees, a reduction in the obligations of agencies to negotiate with them. And fortunately, that one decision was overturned because the unions did appeal it to the district court. But there's many others that haven't been overturned, and it's going to take years to repair, assuming we get an actual neutral body in place, which isn't given because Chuck Schumer, despite having the votes, has failed to prioritize confirming the nominees.
So why is that? Because the Democrats have a 50-50 split in the Senate. There is, Manchin has basically announced that the Build Back Better plan is dead, that he would, prefer American families, the child poverty rate to double than to, continue the child tax credits. So there's very, very little that Democrats can actually do right now. And basically that's limited to, confirming Biden appointees. And they have been moving at a pretty feverish pace for the federal judgeships. Why are these nominations, which, like you said, affect the second largest single group of American workers, that's a lot of people, and the largest set of union workers in the country. Why is Chuck Schumer allowing these nominations to just sit by the wayside?
I can't read Chuck Schumer's mind. I can only speculate. He's clearly not prioritizing it. So why isn't he prioritizing it? He's had the votes. Like you said, these confirmations aren't the things that Manchin and Sinema are opposing, right? There's no indication that it wouldn't go through. He has the votes. So currently, because Lujan is sick, He may not have the votes right now, but that makes it all the more important that we build the pressure on him to prioritize at the moment Lujan as well, or the moment we convince Murkowski or one of the other moderate Republicans to support, which is something that the unions are doing. But one of the nominees, the most important pressing one, which is Susan Grunman to the FLRA, was out of committee and ready for confirmation in December, and he refused to prioritize it. Why is that? This is speculation, but I think it's safe to say that the Chuck Schumer brand of Democrat isn't as friendly to labor as we might hope. If he were, then the one place that they can have the most direct impact would be one of the many things that he would prioritize. I invite Chuck Schumer to prove me wrong. Show me you're a friend of labor and prioritize these confirmations. Prove to us that the Biden administration, which has been called the best friend American labor has had, in a generation, some say ever, prove that that's true by being his ally in the Senate and actually making these confirming these nominations.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and something that you mentioned to me the other day was, what is the relationship of unions to Democrats' worth if we can't even get something like this through? I remember actually back in 2017 when the PRO Act was kind of the litmus test for Democrats, and I remember AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka coming to the Alabama AFL-CIO state convention and threatening to rescind the endorsement for Doug Jones if he didn't co-sponsor it, even though Doug Jones was going to lose anyway, and it wouldn't matter if he co-sponsored it because Republicans had the majority at that time, and Doug Jones had given verbal affirmation to Trumka and our state Fed president that if it came before the House, he would vote for it. He just didn't want to co-sponsor it because of, he thought that I would disagree with him, but he thought that it wouldn't be good for his campaign, even though he was going to lose it anyway. So so like that, it seems to me that like the position of labor as it relates to Democrats has kind of, it's much less aggressive right now when Democrats actually have the power. Like there's some amount of things that Democrats can do for working people in this country. And it does seem like we as a labor movement are more hesitant to speak against, to speak about that than we were when they were not out of power. And I don't know, that's kind of, it's a bug in my bonnet that I've had for a while.
I risk of going beyond the scope of what I'm here to talk about. I really agree. I think it's a major strategic problem for the labor movement in general. I think that we actually have, in some respects, I think that some of the strategy makers in the labor movement have kind of worked themselves into a riddle that they can't solve because everything is subordinated to, the maintenance of the allies they've convinced themselves they have, instead of building independent capital and leverage vis-a-vis all politicians, and through that independence, being willing to call any of them to account. And this alignment, which is perceived and real, of labor in the Democratic Party camp, has led to a situation where we can be taken for granted, where we are not prioritized, where people like Chuck Schumer can prioritize, performative losses. Dying on hills, of his own making in the Senate, because clearly that's what he's prioritized. At least that's what he did in the fall, at the expense of very winnable things like staffing the government with merit systems protectors and the FLRA board that we need.
Yeah, the thing for me, this is Adam jumping in, it just seems like such low-hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you want an easy victory to help working people, to help unions, to use authority that you have given a gridlocked government, here you go.
Right.
Just like it's teed up for you. You just got to hit the ball. and they're like, no, we're not going to grab a bat, actually.
Right.
So it's very frustrating. I can imagine how frustrating it is for you and your members, but you kind of opened up with reminding folks, and Jacob just did it as well, largest employer of union folks in the entire country. And so, just like all contracts kind of relate to other contracts, all these fights are interrelated. Concessions draw more concessions, wins build on wins. And, so I definitely want to see this happen. I want to see some progress being made here so that things can get better for our federal union members, which I hope will then, translate to gains elsewhere in the private sector or in, local and state government employees all across the board. So, I really appreciate the fight that you're undertaking.
Thanks. If I may, could I just highlight some of the support we've already gotten?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So I'm at the Army Corps of Engineers in New York, which is obviously under the Department of Defense, which is a massive piece of the federal picture, of course. And we're in New York, so we put out this open letter call. It's drafted. It's posted at acecouncil.org, which is the Army Corps of Engineers Council in IFPTE, which is my international, the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers. And just in the last 3 weeks, we decided to put out the call not to the national leaders of AFGE, NTEU, IFPTE, all the other Fed sector unions. We decided to focus on the grassroots and prioritize connecting with other folks like me, local leaders, local presidents, folks with small bargaining units that range from, 100 workers to maybe a couple thousand on the high end. But we're talking about, the Fed sector has more than 1,000, maybe upwards of 2,000 different local unions. And we want to demonstrate to Chuck Schumer that, yes, we are his constituents in New York, but this is not just a constituent issue in New York. It affects everybody. And so we put out a call to, we're making cold calls. We're calling through locals across the country. And we have a growing group of people making these calls to build a network of federal local leaders that will hopefully be the future of the federal sector labor movement. And just to, give some props to some of the folks who have signed on. We have the council at AFGE, Council 238, that represents their national bargaining unit in the Environmental Protection Agency. A couple of Social Security locals have signed on in the South and as well as here in New York. A small local of electricians at the Architects of the Capitol have signed on. A bunch of Army Corps locals have signed on because that's obviously kind of where this whole thing started, including the Mobile district down near you guys, as well as Louisville, Kentucky, Chicago, San Francisco, and Seattle. The MSPB Professional Association, the workers who staff the Merit Systems Protection Board, just signed on. They're our most recent signatory. A small NOAA local in Seattle is part of it. A couple of energy locals out west at the Bonneville Power Authority have signed on. The National Association of Immigration Judges. We're up to 26 different locals that have signed on to the open letter, and we aren't stopping. We're going to keep building out this network, even if we lose and things continue to operate under Trump's rules. At the end of this campaign, we're going to have a new network of federal local leaders that are capable of coordinating action, coming together around common causes, and it'll be a victory in any case. But we hope to also convince Chuck Schumer to get back into the fold and actually do one of the few things he can do easily and staff the MSPB and the FLRA.
Yeah, that I completely agree with you on both fronts. That hopefully, surely to goodness, this will result in a win, and we will be able to get these agencies, these boards staffed properly, and see some wins for federal workers, and then by proxy, hopefully some wins for non-federal workers. But also, I do think that having a strong network of people that are in the same fights is important. I look forward to bringing this up at my next local meeting. I'm a member of AFGE, Local 1858. I look forward to bringing it up at my next local meeting, encouraging us to sign on. I think it's important. I don't think I'll have an issue with that. So, Chris, I thank you very much for your work up there in New York, and for your work putting this campaign together, because it's very important, and so let's hope that it passes.
Thanks so much, Jacob and David. You guys do great work. Really appreciate it. I love listening to your show. And that's exactly the next step we need. So any listeners out there who happen to be federal sector, or if you have any contacts with federal sector locals, this is from the bottom up. So even if you're not a local officer yourself, contact your local officers and say, again, the website is acecouncil.org. It's ACECOUNCIL.org. And you'll see two things on there. One is the letter, which includes the list of current signatories, and that's 26 and growing. And then below that is a top 10 worst decisions by the Kiko and Abbott majority to give you a sense of how bad the FLRA leadership is. So if you're in a federal local, please ask your local leaders to sign on. When we hit 50 or 100, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I think we'll have a clearly viable campaign that hopefully we can use to pressure the leaders of our internationals to put some resources behind. And then we'll find a splashy way to deliver this letter to Chuck Schumer.
That sounds great. I love I love splashy displays against politicians. It's one of my favorite things. So speaking my language. Chris, thank you very much for joining the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Good work.
All right. That was Christopher Doles, president of IFPTE Local 98 in New York, representing federal employees at the Army Corps of Engineers, talking about a campaign which, like we said, it's just the most, the most common sense kind of thing. There's not very much that Democrats can do, and so they should do what they can. And protecting the rights of the largest union workforce in the country, the second largest workforce period in the country, I think that this is something that Democrats should be doing in the Senate, and it's a shame that they haven't. And we appreciate folks like Chris for putting some pressure on them.
Yeah, it's one of those where really they shouldn't have to embark on this campaign.
Right.
But I like something that Chris said, though, is they're activating folks and engaging folks along these lines, and that will be cool to see. How many future leaders and activists and organizers inside the unions are going to grow out of this fight? Hopefully a successful fight, but regardless. So I think that's a really cool approach and perspective to bring to it.
Absolutely. So every week we try to do this segment. Last week in Southern Labor, Jonah Furman writes a newsletter, Who Gets the Bird? You can read it at whogetsthebird.substack.com, where he compiles everything that happens across the United States as it relates to labor. So we're talking new organizing, we're talking bargaining updates, we're talking strikes. Of course, it's not totally exhaustive because nothing like this can be, but it's incredibly exhaustive. So much good information is packed into this newsletter that he sends out every week. He didn't get to it last week, so this is actually something like the last 2 weeks in Southern Labor, so there's a lot to get to. And I always love seeing Alabama in the newsletter, and Alabama did show up in the newsletter this time, and it shows up more often than you might think. Alabama does, so that's always great. So let's go ahead and get to it. In new organizing, in the last 2 weeks, 968 more workers across 33 Starbucks shops, including roasteries in New York and Seattle, filed for election, including stores in the South in San Antonio, Texas, Jacksonville, Florida, 2 stores in Tallahassee, Florida, Roanoke, Virginia, Midlothian, Virginia, and 3 stores in Richmond, Virginia, Raleigh, North Carolina, and Atlanta, Georgia. Wow.
The South is showing up.
That's right.
In the Starbucks campaign. That's great.
Amazing. 82 car haulers for Carvana, based in Blue Mound, Texas, are organizing with Teamsters Local 745. 54 drivers for U.S. Foods out of Charlotte, North Carolina, are organizing with Teamsters Local 71. 16 workers at BMR Janitorial in Austin, Texas, are organizing with ATU Local 1091. More Perfect Union reported on the BCTGM's efforts to organize over 1,000 workers at a Hershey's plant in Stewart's Draft, Virginia, who, like other food production workers who've organized and struck over the last several months, they face grueling overtime and a disappearing weekend. Unfortunately, the workers pulled their petition due to a vicious anti-union campaign, including the firing of pro-union workers. Workers at the Alamo Draft House flagship location in Austin, Texas, are organizing with the IWW.
How cool is that?
Very cool. In very different Texas union organizing, active duty National Guardsmen are organizing with the Texas State Employees Union, CWA Local 6186.
That's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, that is going to be interesting.
Yeah, that's not something I would have ever guessed.
Right.
So, I hope we get some more details on that one.
In election wins and losses, all 7 electronic warfare instructors at the Jacksonville and Mayport, Florida naval stations voted to join the apparently independent AAAT Contract Instructors of Florida. 39 workers at Nelson's Greenbrier Distillery in Nashville voted against becoming the first unionized whiskey makers in Tennessee, going 9-21 against joining UFCW Local 1995, which is unfortunate. Again, this was the result of a vicious anti-union campaign where more than 80% of the bargaining unit signed cards at the beginning of this campaign.
Wow.
And they were able to the company was able to flip the votes 9-21 against joining UFCW 1995. Just terrible, terrible news coming out of that. Really unfortunate. If you want to read more about the campaign, though, Kim Kelly wrote about it for The Nation. You can search, Tennessee Whiskey, Kim Kelly, The Nation. It'll probably come up. I don't know the title of the article. Read it a while ago. In strikes and bargaining, the UMWA strikers at Warrior Met went to Washington a couple weeks ago with a Senate Budget Committee hearing highlighting how private equity has played a role in the nearly year-long strike of over 1,000 metallurgical coal miners in Brookwood, Alabama. We did a deep dive on that last week.
Shout out to Bernie for using his chairmanship
Yes.
to host that hearing. That's a good use of actually having a little bit of power.
A couple dozen barbers on military bases in Virginia apparently won their strike, which started in July, against the military haircut contractor, which raised prices but lowered the barbers' cut. The barbers are members of the Laborers International Union of North America. 60 school bus drivers in St. Tammany Parish, Louisiana, joined the ongoing rolling strike wave in that industry with a sick-out, hoping to win a raise. National negotiations between the steelworkers and several large oil companies covering 30,000 workers continue on a rolling 24-hour contract extension having expired February the 1st. So normally what would happen is you would have the contract expire and then you would go on strike. But the bargaining committee or the international unions have decided to do a rolling 24-hour, so like day by day, the contract is extending. So very, kind of tedious negotiations going on there. Those steelworkers rallied outside of Marathon's corporate headquarters in Findlay, Ohio last week. The 600 workers at Beaumont, Texas, at one of the companies at the table, Exxon, are voting on Monday on a new agreement to end the company's lockout that started on May 1st of 2021. So we'll have that.
Yeah, we've been here in Beaumont, Texas
every
for
week.
Quite a while. So, really hope they get a fair contract after this long fight.
AFGE Local 131 rallied with veterans outside of the Tuscaloosa, Alabama VA Medical Center in protest of poor working conditions. The ongoing MLB lockout looks increasingly likely to delay the start of the season and has already delayed the start of spring training games. I think that we have seen a lot of support for the MLB players in this fight, so that's good. Good to hear. The owners make too much money, and a lot of the players make too little money. Louisville, Kentucky screwed up its bonus pay to city workers from the American Rescue Plan and now has to claw back around $200 from workers making $14 an hour. And the unions are pissed.
As would, who wouldn't be pissed?
Right.
And I've seen that personally where, I'll never forget working with a custodian who apparently was slightly overpaid for a couple years. And payroll finally discovered this accident, and of course it's public funds. They are obligated by law to claw it back. But what they did to this poor lady was decide all at once, without any prior advance notice, oh, yeah, we've overpaid you for 2 years. We're going to take it, what took 24 checks to do, we're going to take out all in one check.
Wow.
And this is a person who, as a custodian, was not making enough on this one job to even survive. So
absolutely insane.
God, yeah. So that story really, resonates with me and brings up some memories, and really hope they're able to negotiate a way to do that as painless as possible.
Yeah. With the new Teamsters leadership set to take office on March 22nd after winning in a landslide against the incumbent-backed successor to the longtime President James P. Hoffa, new leadership appointments are being announced. Of note is that the incoming president, Sean O'Brien, and incoming Secretary-Treasurer Fred Zuckerman, both vocal proponents of a more aggressive stance towards the union's largest employer, UPS, will be co-leading the 2023 UPS contract negotiations. Also of interest is the appointment of 2 members of the Teamsters for a Democratic Union Steering Committee to top posts in the union. A new organizing director as well as heads of the warehouse, car haul, and freight division directors were named as well.
Nice.
Yes, very nice. Yeah, so that's it. That's what happened in the last 2 weeks in Southern labor. If you want to see what happened across the United States in the labor movement as it relates to working people, you have got to subscribe to whogetsthebird.substack.com. Jonah does great work, and you can check out his reporting for Labor Notes as well. He's a staff writer for them, does a lot of good work. So listeners will recall that a couple weeks ago I participated on a panel discussion organized by Southern chapters of the Democratic Socialists of America to raise money for the striking coal miners. Listeners donated during the panel, and the fundraiser is still up through the end of the month. They had a goal of $15,000, and they have now passed it. Their fundraiser is currently sitting at just under $17,000. If you want to help them get to $18,000 or $17,000 before the end of the month, the link is in the show notes.
And on that note, I got a chance to attend an additional fundraiser that was held this week. And this one was, we had, it was Jobs with Justice, Southern Workers Assembly, a few different labor unions, and a couple other organizations all collaborated. A friend of the show, Cooper Caraway, was the MC of the event. Braxton and Hayden Wright were interviewed, as well as Vice President Larry Spencer. It was a great event. Our dear brother Lee Baines sent in a recording for a little musical entertainment, and I do not know how much money they raised the other night. And in fact, it was the night we had tornadoes and bad storms, so it was kind of hard to stay with it the whole time. But from what I recall, I know Chicago Federation of Labor gave $5,000 while we were sitting there listening. And there were quite a lot of us in the comments, just chipping in $10-20 where we could. So between the DSA fundraiser, as well as this fundraiser just last week, really great to see that, to see the solidarity. And even those of us who don't have the money to contribute, you probably know someone who does. And that's where, sharing this stuff, having conversations with your friends and family about these issues can make a difference, because even if you don't have $5 to spare, you might know someone who does. Mm-hmm. And you, in fact, might know someone who has a lot more than $5 to spare. And you might not even realize it. But, it's hard not to listen to the story, these stories being told by folks like Braxton and Hayden, and the lives that have been shaped by the strike and have been shaped by the BS that led to this strike and the obscene working conditions. It's hard not to be moved by that.
Yes.
And it's really a testimony to the solidarity that is out there. However, insufficient it may be, as small as we may be as a movement, we're still here. We're still doing the best we can. We're still out here raising money for folks, supporting strike funds, and working on behalf of people we've never met, people who may not look like us or talk like us or live like us, but they're our fellow working class brothers and sisters, and we know that an injury to one is an injury to all. So it's inspiring. And something that Larry said in the one I attended this week, was how much it's really boosting the morale when the miners and their families see these kind of fundraisers and Zoom meetings and all these different organizations that they may have never even heard of that come out of the woodwork to chip in money, chip in supplies, just show solidarity publicly. I think that's it's a big deal, and I have to imagine, and Jacob, you're closer to it than I am, but I'm gonna guess that some folks have had their eyes opened in terms of who's on their side and who's not on their side.
Yeah. That's true. Kim Kelly is closer to it than any of us, I believe, and she said that there are people who were consistent Republican voters would have, before when the strike began, she said, describe themselves to her as conservatives. So when the strike began, Kim Kelly started covering the strike. These coal miners and their families told her that, we appreciate what you're doing. We're conservative, but we appreciate this. And now she says that they would identify as socialists. So,
And that's not to say all of them by any means or anything like that. But I think the point stands strong there that, again, whenever you're in a bind, you kind of figure out who your friends are and who they aren't.
Exactly.
And these folks have had zero help from anyone in the Republican Party, not a whole lot from the Democratic Party. And absolutely nothing from the people who are supposed to represent them in their districts.
Isn't that crazy? I know that the Tuscaloosa Democrats, I believe they have donated some amount, and of course Chris England has been consistent.
Has I'll give credit to the state party. Wade Perry's the executive director down there. They have been doing some consistent messaging about the strike. And like you said, I think Chris England being the chair of the state party and also being right there in the neighborhood, that seems to have helped. But in terms of, I guess, Democrats more broadly, it hasn't been as huge of an issue.
Well, but even those people that are supporting the strike, I think that maybe I'm wrong, totally speculating here, but I think that $15,000 is more from socialists across the country is more than they've gotten from Democrats. Isn't that bonkers?
Yeah.
They certainly haven't publicized it. They have not put it out. If they have made, and I'd love to hear about it. If you're listening, Hayden regularly listens to the show. If you're listening and you're like, oh no, actually, the Alabama Democratic Party donated $20,000 or $30,000 to us, or let us know. But as far as I know, socialists have raised more money for them than Democrats and Republicans.
Well, Democrats in Alabama have a hard time raising money for themselves or even putting candidates on the ballot.
They have a problem putting candidates on the ballot, but they've got they're spending. They spent $1 million last year.
Fair enough. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I don't know where they're getting the money from, but they spent $1 million last year in a non-election. I don't even know what they. Somebody said Tabitha Isner is somebody who's kind of involved in that world, and she said. She said that the party spent $1 million last year, and somebody was like, on what? And she said over a dozen highly paid staffers. So I don't know. We'll see how effective those highly paid staffers are.
Yeah, well, and not to belabor the point, but at the end of the day, this is an important part of Alabama's history that we're in right now. As you've brought up, it's the longest strike in our history now. Over $1 billion siphoned out of our state, out of these neighborhoods, off to Wall Street.
Yeah.
It's obscene, and regardless of how you may feel about the coal industry, I remember one day we were talking about the strike, and I had on my shirt that was from GASP, the Greater Birmingham Alliance to Stop Pollution, and one of the great organizations out here in the state doing good work against pollution and climate change. It is possible to to be against climate change and believe that fossil fuels have to be a thing of the past if we're going to move forward as a species, while at the same time supporting these brothers and sisters down there. It's, it's not exclusive. And you and I have talked about this. We've seen folks like online and some of the, I guess liberal types who more or less don't want to support the miners because of coal, or don't want to support the miners because they think they're all a bunch of, white Trump supporters, which is
right.
They're not all white. They're not all Trump supporters.
40% of the people on strike are black.
Absolutely. It's a very diverse union. And you know what? I don't care who they voted for. That's not going to make a difference into whether or not I think they deserve to win this strike.
Right.
And they deserve to live in dignity. And I'll chip in a few bucks that I have to help them do that.
Yeah.
Don't care what they believe.
Absolutely. So last week we spoke to 2 of the 7 Starbucks workers who were fired in retaliation for their union support in Memphis. Members of the media came into the store before it had closed. They requested an interview, and the workers spoke to them. Starbucks says that they were fired for violating safety and security policies, namely workers being in the store off the clock and having unauthorized persons in the building after close, despite the fact that store policy also says you are not even allowed to tell a customer that you're closed until 10 minutes after. So these members of the media came in before the store closed, requested an interview, and the people spoke to them. We played a clip from a former Starbucks manager who testified to the fact that these policies cited by Starbucks as their official rationale for the firings were routinely broken, and that if they were consistently enforced this harshly, they would not have any staff. Okay, so it seems clear those firings were retaliatory in nature. Well, Starbucks has not stopped their retaliatory behavior. Last week, Cassie Fleischer, a Starbucks worker in Buffalo, announced she had not been scheduled nor allowed to pick up shifts after she took a new job and requested a reduction in 15 hours per week. Okay? So the timeline that she states is she had been working prior to the holiday season 37 to 39 hours a week. She was then reduced to 30 hours a week, 29 to 30 hours a week. And so because of that reduction in hours, she of course had a reduction in pay. She had to get a new job. She got a full-time job, and she requested the further reduction in hours. So this was initially prompted, according to her account, by Starbucks, and then she requested a reduction to 15 hours per week. She says, so that's how that worked. And she says that the policy has always been that you can be a worker at Starbucks as long as you are willing to work 12 hours a week. But now they've implemented a policy mandating at least 20 hours a week and 4 days of availability. 20 hours a week and 4 days of availability. You have to be willing to work that much. That's not a guarantee that you will work that much, but Starbucks, you have to be basically on call for that amount of time, Starbucks is saying. Now, what Starbucks says, they are saying that she had not been fired despite the fact that she was not scheduled to work for 2 weeks, and she was not allowed to pick up a shift. And they also disputed that Starbucks cut her hours recently, leading to a second job loss, or leading to a second job, okay? So remember, she said, I got a second job because Starbucks cut my hours, and then they fired me. Starbucks is saying she's not fired, and they're disputing the fact that Starbucks cut her hours. So they're disputing both of the factual claims there. But just yesterday, and this came out as I was writing my show prep, yesterday, More Perfect Union released leaked audio from Cassie's firing where her manager said she would be termed out, which is Starbucks speak for fired. She also said, quote, "You're not coming back." Okay, so like if I leave that situation as a worker, my impression is that I'm fired. And I think that's a reasonable impression. And then having that impression or that impression would be validated by the fact that I'm not on the schedule for 2 weeks and I'm not allowed to pick up shifts.
Right.
Okay? That seems like she took away from that the reasonable thing. The manager also acknowledged in the audio that Fleischer's situation was triggered by a cutback in hours available to her. Wow. So, like, it's a good thing that she was recording, because it's not now just he said, she said. It's Cassie Fleischer says, Starbucks denies, Cassie Fleischer has the audio to back it up.
I'm going to take this moment to interject and recommend, if you don't know how to do recordings using your phone,
you should learn.
You should learn. And when you are called into meetings with management, it is not a bad idea to record.
Right.
In the state of Alabama, this is a one-party state. In other words, you, as the person recording, is the one party who can consent to it. The other party does not have to consent. So if you are called into a meeting, at least in the state of Alabama and certainly in other places, you called into a meeting with management, it looks to be disciplinary, it looks to be investigatory, you don't have a union rep available, or even if you do have your union rep available, you can certainly press record on your phone in your pocket to have some audio evidence.
Exactly.
And you might not, I always advised my members, I wouldn't tell them or let on that you're doing this, because that's a whole set, you're opening a can of worms if they know in advance. And you don't go brag about it, don't tell everybody in the break room, oh yeah, I was recording, boss such and such.
But you've got it if you need it.
You've got it if you need it, and you never know when it could come in handy. And this is a situation where the company is trying to lie, and thank goodness she's got some evidence.
Right. Yeah. So when this started first coming out about the Memphis workers, we retweeted and shared some of the stuff, and amazingly, the director of crisis communications for Starbucks reached out to the show. We talked about that when we spoke to the Starbucks workers in Memphis, and was wanting to quote unquote correct the record or whatever. He refused to tell us how much he made, and I've also subsequently learned that he is the director of equity and inclusion at Starbucks. So we love woke union busting. That's so much fun. But so anyway, so I have this communication channel now with the director of crisis communications at Starbucks, and so I think it's fun just to see what he's gonna say, and so I sent him More Perfect Union's reporting on this, and I asked him if he had any comment, and amazingly, like we have even his own reply is contradictory, but we've got Cassie's statements, and we've got the fact that Cassie's statements are backed up by the recording. But he replied, I think the below is consistent with what's in the recording. Cassie's lack of availability doesn't allow for her to be able to work at the store. She hasn't been fired. What? What do you mean? What are you talking about? It's not consistent with the recording. But also, if her availability doesn't allow her to be able to work at the store, then she's fired, right? Then she's fired.
Yeah. Don't believe your lying ears. I know you just listened to that, and it's the opposite of what I just told you, but it's actually the same. And you would know that if you trusted me, because I am an equity officer. I have all these fancy degrees, and, clearly, what
You're a pro.
Yeah. Like, you can't just listen to the recording and assume it really says what you just heard. No, you got to listen to what management spins on it.
Yeah,
it's wild. It really is. It's always interesting to see like how narcissistic management can be, where you catch them red-handed and they still
they're just like, nah,
will just go to the mats that no, you didn't see what you just saw. No, you didn't hear what you just heard. It's always interesting, and that and that's why the reason that's so frustrating is the power dynamics at play there. If it's just you and a buddy, and your buddy's BSing you, and you're over a beer or whatever, it's fine, right? We all know those people who are full of crap.
Yeah.
But where it's different though when these people have the power to take your livelihood away or to dramatically affect your conditions at work, which is where most of us spend our time, is either working or sleeping to get back to work. So
Starbucks Starbucks has said that they work with their employees to try to accommodate schedules, but that this is not guaranteed. Every store is different, has different needs, blah 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 blah. But we're adults here. This is clearly retaliation. If Starbucks wanted to make it work, they could.
Yeah.
And she also said, I can make myself available for longer on Saturdays. I could work an 8-hour shift on Saturdays. And in the recording, the manager said that she doesn't like giving 8-hour shifts because she has to give a lunch break.
No. Not a lunch break.
I worked at a restaurant for years, having an availability of 1 day a week for the majority of the year because I had classes, right? I had a really good relationship with my general manager. Now, the owner of the store, totally different thing. He lived in a different state, never worked in our store ever, hardly, and he had a second home in Florida with a jet ski. Okay, so piece of crap, that guy, right? And he also called super side tangent, but when I left, they didn't send me my my tax files that I needed. Yeah, they didn't send me my W-2, and so I asked, and so I repeatedly sent requests to the company saying like, hey, can you give me my W-2? Can you give me my W-2? And so finally I got fed up with it. I said, if I don't get my W-2 in the next 2 days, then I'm reporting this company to the IRS, Department of Labor, whatever. And he emails me finally, after all this effort, he emails me saying, you're a condescending and pretentious and arrogant dick. I'll give you your W-2 when you apologize. And I'm like, what? What? No, I'm not apologizing. Screw you, man. Give me my W-2.
All right. So, thanks for your email. I'll forward that to my attorney.
Yeah, and so the next day I had my W-2 is the ending of that story. But you know, so anyway, my general manager was great. He was really good with me. And
I know you brought that up as a side tangent, but that is a real problem that so many of us have faced when you separate from an employer, whether it's by your choice or their choice. Mm-hmm. How many times do folks get the runaround about getting their W-2s, about getting statements in terms of health insurance, any retirement benefits you may have had.
Right.
That is a very, very common experience I've found. Unless you're one of those rare people who is at the same job your whole working career.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us have dealt with crap like that, and it's hardly ever talked about. I mean, that's not something you ever hear in the media.
Right.
But that is just one of the many little ways that they can screw with you.
Yeah.
And more or less get away with it.
Yeah, so, look, they could obviously make it work if they wanted. Like I said, I worked at this restaurant for years, and I worked on Saturdays. That was my only availability, and I always worked a double on Saturdays. I worked 12, 14-hour days. Sometimes I didn't get a lunch. Sometimes I didn't get a break, but whatever, So I did that, and they worked with me, and then during the summers when I wanted to make more money, they would schedule me for 50, 60 hours a week, okay? I know that's kind of an extreme thing, but and that's not even, I'm not even saying that Starbucks should do that, but
it's not uncommon.
It's not uncommon at all,
especially in this industry.
Especially if you want to work with your employee. If you want it, you can make anything happen if you're willing to actually work with your employee.
Yeah.
So they are right about when Starbucks said that none of this is guaranteed. They're right about that, generally speaking, that nothing is guaranteed, and even the things that the boss says are not guaranteed, because they can change the terms of employment at any time for any reason or for no reason at all. You have no guarantee of consistency in a job where you don't have a union contract, and that's why it is so important for every worker to be in a union, for you to get a union contract, because if you don't have that, you have zero expectation or zero right to consistency. I did say generally, though, because unfortunately for Starbucks, under U.S. federal law, you cannot implement a rule specifically to dissuade workers from unionizing. So Starbucks Workers United has fired a ULP They've also filed a ULP on behalf of the 7 workers fired in Memphis. And in response to the ULP filed on behalf of the Memphis 7, Starbucks said that they looked forward to being vindicated. But it's worth noting that Starbucks does not have a good track record when it comes to ULPs. In July of 2021, the NLRB ruled in the case of 2 retaliatory firings of Philadelphia baristas in 2019 that the company engaged in illegal activity and must offer reinstatement and make them whole. I did say that's unfortunate for Starbucks. Fortunately for Starbucks, though, our system is broken, and it took 2 years to get this obvious ruling through. And even the decision making them whole, quote unquote, that only means back pay minus whatever wages they earned in the interim. So likely the back pay that Starbucks had to give them was 0 or close to it. And also likely they already had other jobs and they did not want to take the job back at a Philadelphia Starbucks. And so, that's really we've got a couple things in tension there. We've got the law that clearly states our rights and clearly says Starbucks is in the wrong, but also the enforcement of the law is bogus in this country. Starbucks workers are not deterred, though. Yesterday, the 3rd Starbucks union in the country won their election by a landslide, 25-3. Only 3 workers in Mesa, Arizona voted against unionization. Amazing. So, next up, I wanted to talk about wage theft and some civil asset forfeiture stuff, because this is a clip that I've been sitting on for a long time, maybe 3 weeks. I think I've had this in my notes for 3 weeks, but I want to get to it because it's really good. Civil asset forfeiture is the process by which cops take your stuff without having had to be found guilty or even charged with a crime. It's a widespread practice, and cops say that it's important in fighting crime, despite the fact that in states that don't allow this anymore, they have not seen crime rate increases following the outlawing of civil asset forfeiture. The implication is also that it is used to take down kingpins, but more than half of forfeitures are less than $1,300. In 2018 alone, 42 states, the District of Columbia, and the U.S. Department of Justice and the Treasury forfeited over $3 billion, which is nearly as much as all burglary that year. In 2015, cops took more from people than burglars did. Some caveats on both sides, though, are that burglary does not include larceny, theft, or robbery, quote-unquote, which are all different things, and that even in 2015, when you add them all together, the theft crimes are approximately double the civil asset forfeiture from that year. However, not all states and municipalities report their civil asset forfeiture data, so the numbers that we have are likely a severe undercount.
I feel very certain it is. I mean, I think I can't speak to nationwide, but I know, just in terms of an anecdotal thing, most everyone I've ever known who ever has been arrested, whether it be DUI or whatever they were arrested for, whatever cash was in their wallet or in their car at the time is almost always, I can't think of anyone really I've ever met who didn't have this experience where the cash that they had on their person when they were arrested disappeared, and it was not returned to them whenever they bailed out, whether that was a couple hours later or 24 hours later or, however long that was. And I can't imagine that is, an isolated event, especially when you start looking at these numbers and you think about how many people are pulled over and then they're arrested, so they're taken off to jail. What did they have in their wallet? What did they have in their car? How much of that will ever make its way back to the person? Because being arrested, by definition, you haven't been convicted. You are legally an innocent person. You just had all your stuff jacked. And if the charges are dismissed down the road, or perhaps you take it to trial and you are found not guilty, Are you ever going to get your stuff back? You ever going to get your money back? You know, not to mention how many times they may just completely demolish your property.
Right.
Not, you know, so of course we're talking about them taking it, but they also, it's not, you know, unheard of for them to quote unquote suspect drugs in your vehicle and rip the thing to shreds just about. It's not unusual or like unheard of necessarily. I'll say unheard of. You know, I wouldn't say it's common necessarily, but it certainly happens where folks have their homes raided.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the doors are busted down, the windows are broken, any number of things. That's before they've been convicted of any crime. And we've seen cases where the wrong house gets raided. They meant to get somebody else, and they got you instead. Now they just blew up your door, broke your windows. For what? You ever going to get any justice out of that? Accountability. You know, Representative Treadway loved that word, accountability. We got to hold folks accountable. What about this? What about wage theft from bosses and civil asset forfeiture from law enforcement? Between the two, they are fleecing people. They are fleecing ordinary, everyday working class folks who don't have anything to be fleeced, really. We don't have the extra. We can't afford this, and yet they're doing it.
Right. Yeah, and the people never get their stuff back from civil asset forfeiture. Very, very rarely, because like I said, more than half of things that are stolen in civil asset forfeiture are less than $1,300. It costs about $3,000 to get a lawyer, and because it's civil asset forfeiture and not criminal asset forfeiture, you do not have a right to an attorney. You don't have a right to an attorney, so you would have to personally get an attorney. And most people can't do that, and so they just lose their stuff, which is very, very bad. So despite this, and in other powerful people picking the pockets of worker news, wage theft is consistently, even without civil asset forfeiture, just wage theft alone is consistently higher than all forms of property crime combined. Okay, so when we talk about combined bosses and cops stealing from people, it's way more than all property crime. Despite that, though, Al Sharpton came on MSNBC to talk about some guy stealing steaks in New York. Let's play that clip.
It is true that people are just walking in and walking out with it.
No, there's no doubt about it. I mean, you go to a local pharmacy, Dwayne Reed or Rite Aid, any of them, and you've got to get someone to help assist you. I mean, they have the little button there.
Yep.
You hit the buzzer, and the guy comes over and unlocks your toothpaste. I mean, we're talking about basic stuff.
As well.
What did I miss that we now have to lock up toothpaste?
Yeah, and
I'm just curious, Rev, really quickly. I mean, Eric Adams said he's going to do his best to fix this. I'm just curious. I mean, he's got a governor who's saying, well, I don't know that we want to give the judges any power to make decisions on whether they've seen the same bad guy in front of them like 12 times in the past week. And then you've got a DA. I know you talked to the DA. The DA's going, oh, we don't want to punish anybody unless it's like really bad. You know, so, yeah, you can steal whatever you want to steal, and, yeah, we won't do any jail time. And then you've got, a woke city council. I'm just curious, is Eric Adams going to be able to do anything? Well, he's obviously surrounded by elected officials who want New York to remain chaotic.
Well, I think he's got a challenge there because there is a debate in the criminal justice system, and there are those that are concerned, including me, about overloading the system and the jails with petty crimes. But at the same time, you cannot have a culture where people are just at random, just robbing and stealing, and is out of control and is put on the front page of newspapers, which only encourages others to do it. In fairness to Eric, he's only been mayor 5 weeks. But but even as unfair to him, Eric, they're locking up my toothpaste.
Jeez. I mean,
so put it on the papers entices people to do it more, but y'all wasting segments doing it.
Yeah. I mean, it's I mean, this is supposed to be the liberal network, right? I mean, this is supposed to be the bleeding hearts. This is supposed to be the woke network. I mean, give me a break. What about a culture where cops and bosses can steal from workers without even having to so much as appear before a judge? What about a culture where the media doesn't report on the theft from workers by their bosses? That's the culture that we have now, and we shouldn't have that. There are almost no resources devoted to fighting wage theft while we spend dollars and time talking about petty shoplifting. Like, cry me a river, okay? Walgreens has been in the news about, whatever, shoplifting. They had $2.3 billion in profits last year after all that shoplifting, okay? So cry me a river. I'm not saying, don't shoplift. Okay, I don't think it's good for society that people shoplift, but that's not the worst thing happening with regards to theft in this country.
Right. You know what makes me angrier than someone stealing? It's when someone doesn't have any food to eat.
Yeah.
And therefore decides that stealing the food is about the best idea they can come up with. Now, that's obscene. Not the stealing.
Right.
But the fact that people are hungry and suffering, you probably saw this other day where a police department was advertising where they busted up a theft ring of diapers.
Yeah,
right.
I saw that.
And that's the thing. People, stealing diapers and formula, steaks, Gain laundry detergent. I agree. You're right. It's not a good thing if that's just rampant or happening all over the place. But what's worse is a system where people are brought to that point for whatever reason, either because they're that desperate or because they figured out a hustle. And this is the hustle that they have, engaging in black market deals with petty grocery items. Well, hell, maybe if they had access to a decent union job, paying a living wage and health care and retirement pension, they wouldn't be so inclined to embark on this hustle.
And even if we're if we're supposed to be okay, let's say that we do care about theft, okay? This is top of our priorities. We want to eliminate, if that is actually your mindset, a clear-headed and neutral analysis of the facts would say that we should be prioritizing the theft of bosses from workers because that's what happens the most. When we're not even talking about just shoplifting. We're talking about all property crime combined. I'm talking about bank robberies. I'm talking about stealing cars. I'm talking about all of it, robbing pawn shops. I'm talking about people stealing family heirlooms. When you combine all of that together, bosses steal more money from workers than all of that.
Yeah.
All of it. Okay, so if we actually care about ensuring that that property rights in this system as it is set up, we're not even talking about where I think workers, the value that they created, I think that's being stolen from them. But we're not even talking about that. We're not even getting to that. We're just talking about the system as it exists, the regime of property rights as it exists. Bosses steal more from workers. So if we want to enforce the current regime, we should still be looking at bosses. I mean, isn't that amazing? This is a property rights regime that has been set up by the bosses. This was created by and for bosses, the system of property rights that we have in this country, and they still violate it more often than working people do. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that crazy?
I would love to know how many folks working for Walgreens or CVS or these other, stores that have been in the news, so, that have been allegedly targeted by these sophisticated shoplifting rings. Okay, how many of their workers have been screwed out of overtime pay they should have gotten?
Yeah.
How many of their workers had to work off the clock because they were coerced by their management or pressured by their management to, I need you to, they've already clocked out and they have to come back in and finish up some things, or they got them in there earlier before they're supposed to be there. They're off the clock doing labor. How many times have they been screwed out of insurance? How many times have they had hours that they worked that mysteriously didn't show up on their paycheck? And on and on and on. You and I both saw these kind of things in our time in the service industry. It's, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to cry any tears because some people are stealing steaks or stealing shampoo or whatever the hell they're doing. Not as long as our brothers and sisters who are working in these places are being victimized and exploited by these very companies who are wanting us to cry a river.
Yeah. So anyways, when you think of thief, you probably think of some masked poor person, but you would be more accurate if you thought of a boss or a cop.
Absolutely. He doesn't look like the burglar that you see on TV.
Yeah.
He looks like suit and tie, probably. He probably looks like this joker you're talking to at Starbucks, or he looks like Tommy Tuberville's dumbass.
Yeah. We're going to talk about, we've got two more things that we want to get to. We had some other stuff. We wanted to talk about child poverty, the Hershey's campaign losing, break down some of that. We're going to save that for next week if we can get to it. But I do, since this is such timely news, I do want to get to the RWDSU filing ULPs, and I want to answer our listener voicemail from last week. So we're going to get to those two right now. Starbucks is not the only company breaking the law and illegally interfering with their workers' right to form a union. Amazon is as well. The union has filed 3 charges against Amazon. RWDSU, the union that the workers at Amazon have decided that they want to affiliate with. RWDSU, the retail, wholesale, and department store union, have filed 3 charges against Amazon. From their press release, the first 2 are a ULP for an unfair labor practice, that's what ULP stands for the removal of union literature from break rooms. They say that Bamazon Union Worker Organizing Committee members have been posting pro-union literature in non-work areas on non-working time alongside anti-union postings from the company. The Bamazon Union flyers were removed by Amazon in violation of the law. The law states that in neutral areas where there is the ability to post for workers to post things, or where the company is posting anti-union propaganda, the workers have the right to post their own flyers, their own literature. That's the law. Amazon is violating it. They also filed a ULP, an unfair labor practice, against Amazon for the promulgating of a new rule. You'll remember that tracks with what the Starbucks Workers United, with what they filed their ULP for, because of the new rule about how much you have to be available to work for Starbucks to work there. At Amazon, they promulgated a new rule limiting workers' access inside the facility for any time period greater than 30 minutes prior to and after their shift. This rule is not in their policy handbook and violates status quo under the law. So what is status quo? Status quo says that you can't, the law is basically that you cannot, in response to workers organizing in your facility, you cannot create out of whole cloth a new rule or begin implementing a rule that had not been implemented before in response to workers organizing. Amazon in Bessemer has created a new rule out of whole cloth that says that workers cannot stay inside the facility for any time period greater than 30 minutes prior to and after their shift. That is obviously, it's not in their handbook, so this new rule is obviously aimed at hampering worker conversations, at hampering union organizing. It's illegal. The third is a bit different. It's very interesting. They call this one potentially precedent setting. They are challenging the legal right of employers to hold captive audience meetings at all. Section 7 from their press release, Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act guarantees employees, quote, the right to self-organization, to form, join, or assist labor organizations, to bargain collectively through representatives of their own choosing, and to engage in other concerted activities for the purpose of collective bargaining or other mutual aid or protection, as well as, quote, the right to, quote, refrain from any or all such activities. When workers are forced to attend required meetings, the union says, during work hours to hear the company's anti-union propaganda, that violates their right to refrain from any and all such activities. I think that's a good argument. This unfair labor practice charges that Amazon is in violation of Section 8A1 and or 8A3 of the National Labor Relations Act and seeks to challenge the current yet often challenged case law precedent, which has for too long allowed employers to compel attendance to anti-union meetings. These aptly named captive audience meetings are coercive, and workers should have the right, as is already protected under the law in Section 8, to not engage in them. The union can't force workers to attend union meetings because of the law. They have the right to refrain from activities like that. They should also have the right to refrain from activities that are against the union from the company. The ULP charge seeks to remedy via review of this law by the newly seated National Labor Relations Board. They do this following a memorandum from the NLRB General Counsel requesting workers pursue cases like this. So we are hopeful that this will win. And if it does win, that's going to be huge because so many workers, I took off work last week and spent all last week knocking on doors of Amazon workers. And there are so many of these people. I mean, not so many. The workers have been able to reach most of the people by now. But there are people who the workers have not been able to talk to about the union. And I could tell in my conversations with some of these people that they had only heard the company side of the argument, and they took it as gospel, basically. And so they asked me questions that were clearly informed by anti-union propaganda from the company. And so I either told them how and why it's wrong, or I recontextualized it to make sure that they have the full context of what Amazon is saying. And every time I did that, they said, wow, Amazon didn't tell us that. That doesn't sound so bad. Wow, they didn't tell us that part. Oh, I didn't know that. Because in these mandatory anti-union captive audience meetings, they're not telling workers the full truth. They're not giving them the full context of everything that they're talking about. They are only spouting the company line with everything else taken from it. And so I was talking to a worker last week who asked me how to talk to people who have been informed by this stuff, this kind of stuff. And, I said that we do have one advantage on our side, which is that all we have to do is tell the truth. All that we've got to do is tell the truth.
That's right.
And the company doesn't have that advantage. So, let's get to our voicemail, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. Adam, let's play that voicemail that we got last week.
Hey, Adam and Jacob. My name's Austin, and I've been living in Huntsville for a little over 4 years now, and spent a couple of years working at one of the bigger breweries in town, and since moved on from that job. But during my time there, I always hoped I learned about the concept of an employee-owned workplace, and I always hoped that might be something that we may have been able to do while I was there, and it didn't work out. But I've got some friends that still work there, and anyway, I just wanted to ask your opinion on the difference, maybe some of the pros and cons between unionizing a workplace versus pushing for a employee-owned workplace. And I really appreciate what you do, and I hope to hear back from you. Thanks. Bye.
I'm so glad that we got a message along those lines, because something I plan to talk to you about after the show wraps is really getting some guests who can shed light on this exact issue in terms of different models of employee ownership. I think you agree with me, and I know David. We're big fans of worker-owned co-ops. I think cooperatives and I think are really a way to build the kind of economy we want inside the current system. And so someone I would recommend is Richard Wolff. Probably a lot of our listeners are familiar with him, but if you're not, he's a great economist, and he has a show called Economic Update. He has a website and kind of organization, Democracy at Work. So check out Democracy at Work. You can find, that'll kind of get you started down the rabbit hole of worker-owned co-ops, because I think there's so much potential there, and the more that we as working people can pool our resources and basically like pull the plug out from the system as a whole, the more we can work together and not have to rely on capitalists or governments to survive, to thrive. I think that is really the way of the future. That said, Austin touched on an interesting dynamic here in terms of unionizing versus worker ownership. There are different degrees of worker ownership, and some is more legit than others. Some is more or less like, oh well, you get a little bit of stock options in the company, so therefore we're employee owned, even though you don't have a damn say so at all about how the operations are or the investments of the company. It's kind of an on paper type of thing. So I think it's easy. Some companies are really, just as they have leaned into the talk on diversity, equity, inclusion, some companies have leaned into that, the employee ownership, as just a, just PR. It's just to slap a nice shiny coat of paint on the same kind of stupid company that they always had and that everybody else in their industry has. So I think there's a lot of danger there. And what I've also seen, and a friend of mine spent some time up in Vermont and has helped me learn about some of the issues there, where you have these co-ops who are employing people and then screwing over the employees, right? So there sometimes are potentials for tension between the co-ops who are and the folks who are owners of the cooperative, versus folks who are working for the cooperative, who may or may not, for various reasons, be considered co-op owners. Or maybe they are, but they're outnumbered. Maybe there's enough folks who don't actually do any labor there to kind of outvote them. And so you've seen, what should be democratic cooperative institutions engaging in, nefarious labor practices themselves. Now, and all that is before you even get to the big picture of if you're still operating an enterprise in a market economy and ultimately to produce profit, how are you essentially like exploiting yourselves, right? Are you like extracting your own surplus value from your labor and still engaging in all the things that come with engaging in the marketplace? I think we can be aware of those things while also recognizing still the many benefits that come with it. So in terms of what should you pick, I think that really would just be a case-by-case kind of basis. And I think there's nothing stopping some aspect of both, really. I mean, why not unionize with the goal of eventually taking over the company? Or if it looks like, for whatever reason, you're sort of closer down that road, push on the employee ownership side to recognize a union and enshrine collective bargaining agreements. I think the two can work hand in hand, really.
Right.
And that's why something I'm interested in, and hopefully we'll have some more content on the show so we can learn more about these two paths and how they can relate to each other, how they can build off each other, and how ultimately in the longer view, we as working class people can start to put our resources there. And because wouldn't it be nice if like all of your shopping, all of your consumption, quote unquote, could really be funneled into enterprises that were either union shops or co-ops, or some combination of the two. I think building that economy, I think Richard Wolff maybe speaks of it as the solidarity economy. And I know he had a great interview a while back. Let's see, Humboldt Institute, I believe. Some folks affiliated with the Green Party working with indigenous tribes up in the Northwest, building a whole community around cooperatives and worker ownership. So there's a lot of really exciting stuff out there. It's not talked about a lot, and so and I think it's still relatively new in some ways and still relatively small in other ways. But then there's stuff that's been around our communities for a long, long time. Talk to any farmer, they know about a co-op. So I'm glad to get a voicemail on that subject. It's just a good reminder that we need to dive deeper into that that field and get some experts who can come on and educate us about this.
Yeah. I mean, I think that what should you do? Unionize or do a worker co-op? I mean, like becoming a. Obviously the devil is in the details when you're talking about worker co-ops. Like you said, some versions are better than others, but assuming that we're talking about a truly democratic and a truly worker-owned enterprise where workers own and workers run the business, if you're talking about converting a current business to a worker-owned co-op, the hitch that you're going to find there is that you've got to get the boss to agree to it.
Right.
Right. And so you don't, and so that whatever, more power to you and more power to the person who owns the enterprise. If you can actually get the boss to cede his control, like if you have that sort of personal leverage and you feel that the person individually is that type of person that he would relinquish his control and ownership in the enterprise, that would be great. And I think Adam and I would both love to see that, because as opposed to
get in on it. Hell,
yeah.
I mean, I'm very much interested, and I think I speak for most of us in any way affiliated with this show, that we would all be excited to see more democratic, worker-owned cooperative type shops, enterprises, industries, whatever you want to call it, anything moving in that direction here in North Alabama or the Tennessee Valley, I think would be fantastic, and would love to collaborate on that.
Right. But like I said, the hitch there is that for worker ownership, you have to get the current ownership to concede.
Yeah.
You do not have to have the boss's permission to unionize. And in fact, in almost every instance, you will not have the boss's permission. And so, we see how even progressive companies, quote unquote, and organizations fight against even unionization, which is not worker ownership. So I would feel pretty confident betting my money that whatever brewery you worked at or your friends work at currently, the boss will not concede to turning it into a worker co-op, and they would oppose any unionization effort. But the good thing about unionization is that you don't need their permission. All you need is the solidarity of your sisters and brothers on the job. And then once you unionize and you start working on your contract, one of the things that you can do, which in the labor movement, we don't talk enough about, I don't think, is you can put into your contract that any sort of ownership change has to give the workers the first right of refusal. meaning that if the own and we see this all the time, that bosses go bankrupt, bosses want to sell their company to a bigger corporation, whatever, we see it all the time, and they don't even have to consult their workers on it, much less tell their workers like, oh, hey, would you be interested in buying this enterprise at market rate? Like, would you be interested in it? They don't have to consult them on it. They don't have to offer it to them. They don't have to do any of that. And you could, because you can put anything in a contract. You can put anything in a contract. And so you could, as a union, as your sisters and brothers on the job, you could fight for that to be in your contract and say, look, boss man, if you ever are interested in changing the ownership, if you're ever interested in going bankrupt, you have to say to us, the union, to us, the workers, you can buy it if you want. You can buy the business if you want. So that is something. What would be better? Full worker ownership and control. I think that would obviously be preferable. But what is more achievable and what can actually lead to the former, I think, is unionization. Yeah. So those are some of my thoughts on that.
I'm so glad you mentioned the right of first refusal. I was going to bring that up myself. And back a couple years back, when we saw Jeremy Corbyn and sort of the left wing of the Labor Party take power, however briefly, in the party, that was part of their platform. That was part of their plank. But in this case, it would have been, nationwide, any business that was planning to go out of business, to close up, or just simply sell.
And I think that makes sense as a law. That doesn't even violate any sort of property rights regime.
Not even saying that's necessarily always going to work,
and not even saying that the workers want it. Like, what if some of the workers don't want to buy it? Like, okay, that's still an option.
Yeah, they may see this as just like, hey, I'm just doing this for a little while. It's not. I'm not going to make a life out of it, or I don't want to put that kind of investment forward. But it's all really fascinating stuff. Mr. Anderson in the comments mentioned where you can have consumer owned or maybe like neighborhood owned type businesses where the employees themselves are unionized, and so again there's kind of both going on. He gave the example of a community owned grocery store where so maybe the community, the neighborhood, there is some sort of democratic ownership structure there where everybody has a piece in the operations and the ownership of the grocery store. Meanwhile, whoever goes to work for the store could be unionized and negotiate with the board or governing structure of the grocery store. I think those types of things we need so much more of, and really I think there's a lot of opportunities here for labor to move in this direction and collaborate with each other, because we aren't capitalists. We don't have capital. We don't have enough money to just go out and buy properties like this.
And if you're interested in supporting something like that, the Bank of Labor is a really, really cool thing. They are owned by the operating engineers, I think, and their employees are represented by, I believe, the Teamsters.
The mine workers.
The mine workers. That's right. Their employees are represented by the mine workers.
Shout out to David Story. I had no idea.
The machine,
never heard of them, and
they're
David
great.
Stories, how I learned about that.
The Machinists Local 44 and their state council use the Bank of Labor. The North Alabama Labor Council uses the Bank of Labor. The Huntsville Industrial Workers of the World uses the Bank of Labor. The only reason that our show hasn't switched to the Bank of Labor is because we've got like 1,000 checks with our Redstone Federal Credit Union on it. So I want to use all those checks because we spent good money on them because they're union printed checks. Did you know that you can get union printed checks? You can, and we have them. So, anyway, the Bank of Labor, look it up. Good stuff.
And Austin and your friends, we need a cooperatively owned, worker-run brewery in North Alabama. We need cooperatively owned, worker-run
bookstores,
lots of things. Maybe just the whole world. But short of that, I think there's a lot of opportunities, and it would be a great thing to do here in North Alabama. Something I've learned from Professor Wolf is, I believe in Italy, and perhaps some other European countries, but definitely in Italy, part of their unemployment laws and unemployment insurance system is that if you have multiple workers who are unemployed, they can actually more or less like pool their unemployment checks and get support to start a co-op. So yeah, if like, you know, you and 5 or 6 other folks get laid off at your place of business, and you know, you could draw unemployment while you're searching for other work, or in this system, you and your 5 or 6 friends who just got laid off with you, y'all can all come together, devise a plan, and actually get some support from the state there to start your own co-op. You know, that's not a radical measure. It's not like Italy is a paradise and doesn't have many of the same issues we have, but here we go. Here's a real life example of how just a slight little tweak in the law, slight little changes in the way we think about things and invest in things can provide whole new opportunities for the way we operate. So great stuff. Yeah, I could talk about that all day, and I'm looking forward to really learning more about this.
Yeah. We have talked to the people from the appeal.
Yes.
The appeal, they went to a worker-run enterprise, worker-run media. They don't own it, but they run it. They have like investors or something. And we interviewed them as they were going through that process. So that's something that you could go back and look at as well.
And our friends at Means TV are really trying to, you know, blaze a trail along those lines, but for a media platform and you know, the idea being kind of like a worker-owned co-op Netflix. I know we talked to some of our wobbly sisters down in Florida. Gosh, I forget the name of the restaurant there, but when we did our series of IWW interviews, I know that in one of those cases, some of those sisters were actually going to start their own co-op food service.
Oh, I forgot what it was called.
Yeah, so I haven't heard anything from them. So I don't know if they're still, you know, doing that project. If they are, definitely want to see that. But I think we have to think outside the box as labor folks, and you know, especially in a country and in a state where so few folks do belong to unions or even have a realistic chance of seeing a union. So many folks, it just seems so far off. Like, yeah, it's a great idea, but like it'll never happen where I work, or you know, maybe they're in a weird, you know, maybe they're gig workers or freelance, whatever the situation may be. I think that's got to be a tool in our toolbox that we combine and supplement with we have to have the focus of organizing workplaces and organizing workers and building a strong, robust labor movement. And I think it all just goes hand in hand.
Absolutely. All right, so that is going to be it for us today, folks. That's it for today's episode of the Valley Labor Report. We appreciate your time. If you would like to help us stay on the air, you can, or buy our new hat. You can make a one-time or recurring donation. All of that on, here we go, again, a union platform, unionly.io/o/TVLR. unionly.io/o/TVLR, no caps. If you caps anything, it's going to mess it up, okay? No caps. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail like Austin did, or share your thoughts about today's episode, ask us a question, share a win, we would love to get some of those. We would love to get some voicemails telling us stories about how you have been able to win in your workplace with your union, with your brothers and sisters, something like that. The number is 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857.
Don't forget to donate to the mine workers.
That's right.
Fundraisers are still ongoing. I believe it's in the show notes, and of course you can find that pretty easy. And don't forget to like and subscribe and share and all that good stuff. We're bad about forgetting to remind folks of that. But
I never do that. But yeah, do share the stuff. I don't know what's going on, but the last couple of weeks, we haven't been getting as many people like watching the clips and stuff throughout the week. I don't know what the deal is with that, but like
that's a free, easy way you can really support the project. And you know, if you support what we're trying to do here in bringing news and analysis from and by and for the labor movement here in Alabama, that's an easy way you can help out the cause.
Yep.
And chances are there's someone in your life that might be intrigued by what we're talking about and the type of guest that we're bringing. So please, do whatever you can there on those fronts. I'm not a social media guy myself, so I feel that if you're not. But hey, talk to folks.
Yeah.
However you communicate, whether you send emails, our social media, or write a damn letter, whatever it is, spread the word. Spread the word. We appreciate it.
And I'll be on Ben Burgess's show debunking anti-union arguments.
That's great stuff.
He's a big YouTuber, big YouTube guy.
Yeah.
So we'll
He's had stuff in Jacobin and all over the place. He did
Good
speak
stuff.
with us during our 72-hour marathon.
He did.
So it's
So looking
great to
forward
see that.
Looking forward to that. It's going to be fun. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller, and we will see you next week.